Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became a Gamma Warrior? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Child abuse casts a shadow the length of a lifetime. Herbert Ward. Centuries have drifted past since quirks first swept across humanity, turning the familiar world inside out. It all began with that first glowing child, a spark that set off an avalanche. With quirks came chaos and wonder, heroes soaring through the sky and villains lurking in the shadows. Society reshaped itself in response, laws rewritten, new traditions born, and the very notion of what was possible changed forever. The world never paused, never looked back, carried forward by the tide of superhuman potential. Yet, amidst the headlines and the spectacle, there were those who left their mark in quieter ways, names that didn't always make the front page, but whose influence ran deep. One such name, largely overlooked by the general public but never forgotten by those who mattered, was Dr. Bruce Banner. While most people were busy idolizing the flashiest quirk users, fixated on dazzling powers and epic battles, Banner forged a different path. He was proof that you didn't need a quirk to change the world. Armed with an unparalleled intellect, relentless determination, and a rare kind of empathy, Banner became a pivotal figure. His breakthroughs in energy science didn't just provide cleaner, safer power, they created the backbone of modern civilization. And his pioneering work in quirk genomics unlocked secrets that allowed society to understand, regulate, and even help those whose powers threatened to spiral out of control. Banner's influence was everywhere, though you might not always see it. The city lights that never went dark, the hospitals that healed mutation-related illnesses, the schools that taught gifted children to manage their abilities, all of it owed something to his tireless work. His legacy ran in the background, as essential and invisible as the air people breathed. By the time All Might emerged, capturing the world's imagination and hope, Banner had already become a legend among scientists and heroes alike. His reputation stood shoulder to shoulder with the likes of David Shield, another giant in the field of support technology. Their names were whispered with reverence in labs and hero agencies, their discoveries shaping the foundations of the age. But stories don't always start in the spotlight. Not every hero gets a parade or a cheering crowd. Some beginnings are quiet, even painful. Some journeys are marked more by struggle than by celebration. People love to believe their idols started out strong and unbreakable, but that's rarely the truth. Every hero, no matter how noble or powerful, carries private wounds, sacrifices, and regrets that don't make it into the history books. Scars are inevitable in a world where power can both save and destroy. And so, as we peel back the layers of history, we find ourselves drawn not just to the shining legends, but to the stories that started in the shadows. To those who fought their battles away from the limelight. Which brings us to the true subject of this story. Someone whose journey is only beginning, but whose path will be shaped by the echoes of those who came before. Rigo Shizurashi entered the world one thunder-soaked evening, the kind where the rain drummed steady against the hospital windows and the city lights outside blurred into watery halos. The air in the delivery room felt thick, heavy with anticipation and the scent of antiseptic, muffling every sound except the steady beat of the rain. Nurses hovered over the newborn, trading glances and murmurs at his arrival. He didn't howl or wail like most babies. Instead, he simply blinked, wide-eyed, taking in the world with a gaze that seemed too aware for someone so new. It was as though, even then, Rigo was trying to understand something beyond the reach of words. Sayaka, his mother, cradled him gently, pressing his tiny form close to her heart. For a fleeting moment, the chaos of the world faded, replaced by a fragile tenderness within the circle of her arms. She whispered soft encouragement, her voice a calm anchor in the storm, and for that instant, Rigo's universe was nothing but warmth and safety. Standing over them, Gariki Shizurashi cut an imposing figure, still clad in his full pro-hero attire. The suit was an engineering marvel, a testament to both the danger of his power and the lengths he'd go to control it. Layer upon layer of radiation-resistant metals and smart graphene composites merged seamlessly over his frame, giving him a sculpted, almost futuristic silhouette. Matte black and silver gleamed in the fluorescent lights, while intricate heat shields lined his chest and forearms, catching any stray energy before it escaped. Bands of light pulsed softly under the armor, shifting through hues of blue and white as the suit's internal regulators responded to Gariki's atomic fluctuations. Every movement was fluid joints engineered so precisely that he seemed lighter than air, not weighed down by the burdens of protection. The helmet, with its seamless visor, could snap shut in an instant, sealing away his power and his expression from the world. The suit was more than protection. It was a statement intimidating, commanding, a fusion of science and heroism that left no doubt about the strength underneath. To the public, Gariki was Atomo's a rising star among pro heroes, his name already etched into the top 10 of the hero ranking charts. His quirk, atomic energy manipulation, made him a spectacle. He could bend the invisible forces at the heart of all matter, unleashing devastating attacks or absorbing even the most volatile threats. He was a symbol of raw power and calculated control, his image perfectly curated for crowds and cameras. Every interview, every appearance, was a performance in endless loop of confidence, bravado, and easy smiles, the promise of safety wrapped in a hero's swagger. But when the house finally fell quiet, when no one else was around to see him, Gariki's ambition only seemed to grow more restless, filling every silent corner. He'd prowl the length of the living room, pacing like a caged animal, his voice humming with an urgent, almost feverish energy. Alone, he'd recount his past victories in vivid detail, the stories tumbling out of him faster and louder, as if he needed to convince the empty air that his moment wasn't over yet. Each tale ended with a promise a vow that his best days weren't behind him, that he was destined for something even greater than anyone had ever seen before. It wasn't enough for Gariki to surpass All Might's legendary strength. It hungered for something far bigger, to eclipse All Might's entire legacy, to carve out an impact so deep that history would have no choice but to remember his name. There was a time, not so long ago, when Gariki actually stood at the very top. For a brief, heady stretch, he wore the title of number one, respected and feared by everyone in the business. But then All Might arrived in Japan almost like fate itself had conspired against him and, in the span of a single year, seized the crown. The hero rankings flipped overnight. New contenders emerged, hungry and bright-eyed, and Gariki found himself slipping, not just down a notch or two, but tumbling all the way to 10th place before he could catch his breath. Strangely, out in public, none of this seemed to matter. Nobody stopped him on the street or whispered behind his back. The crowd's gaze had shifted, utterly captivated by All Might, like Gariki had been erased from the spotlight entirely. It was as if he'd become invisible, a relic overshadowed by the new symbol of hope. Yet for Gariki himself the sting never faded. The bitterness clung to him, growing heavier each day. Losing his spot to someone stronger wasn't just a blow to his pride, it gnawed at his sense of purpose, leaving a wound that refused to heal. So whenever Gariki found himself back in the public eye, he wore a mask of calm determination. He concealed the resentment simmering beneath, every muscle taut with the effort of pretending. But in his heart he pinned his last hopes on his son. Maybe Rigo would be the one to topple All Might from his throne, to show the world that the Shizurashi names still meant something, that their legacy hadn't ended with him. Gariki grew obsessed with the idea that their family's quirk wasn't just powerful, but unstoppable, that with each generation, it only became fiercer, more refined. He spoke of Rigo's potential like it was prophecy, insisting the boy was meant to surpass every record, every expectation, even his father's own legend. Gariki's pride wasn't just fierce, it was insistent, pressing in on everyone around him until it seemed to fill the space, suffocating and unyielding. To him, the future felt rigid and predetermined, a single unbreakable line drawn straight through destiny. There was no room for luck, for choice, or for his own son's hopes if they strayed from that path. In Gariki's eyes, the story had already been written, and all that remained was for Rigo to step into his role whether he wanted to or not. Rigo, blissfully unaware of these expectations, only saw his father as Papa larger than life, strong and protective, a constant presence in his earliest memories. He would climb into Gariki's lap, tracing the glowing lines of his suit with chubby fingers, listening to stories of hero work and rescue missions. He was captivated not just by his father, but by the legends of All Might, the enduring symbol of hope, and by Bruce Banner, the scientist who straddled the line between destruction and healing. These heroes loomed large in his imagination, not just for their strength, but for the ways they wrestled with who they were. Yet Rigo's dreams quietly diverged from the path laid out before him. While he admired the courage and might of pro-heroes, he found himself drawn to something different. He wanted to understand the world's mysteries, to mend what was broken, to use knowledge as his tool. The idea of saving lives not through battle, but through discovery and healing, captured his heart. He pored over books and tinkered with puzzles, searching for answers in places where fists could never reach. But Gariki was deaf to these hopes, his vision fixed too tightly on a future of power and legacy. He didn't see the scientist in his son, only the next link in a chain he refused to let break. Rigo's gentle curiosity, his quiet determination, were invisible to a man who only valued strength. For now, though, Rigo was just a boy with bright eyes and big dreams that, for the moment, belonged only to him. As Rigo grew, his brilliance became more and more obvious to everyone around him. It wasn't just the way he asked questions, though he always had a million, each one sharper and more thoughtful than the last. It was the way he looked at the world, as if every shadow and glimmer held some secret he was determined to uncover. By the time he turned 3, he wasn't just flipping through picture books or stacking blocks like the other toddlers. He was devouring basic chemistry texts, tracing the periodic table with his tiny finger while he sounded out element names. He'd spend hours puzzling through chemical equations, his brows furrowed in concentration, utterly absorbed. At 4, Rigo could already explain the difference between nuclear fission and fusion to anyone who would listen, a feat that went right over the heads of the other kids in his class. It didn't matter to him. He wasn't trying to impress. He just couldn't help sharing what he'd learned, his words tumbling out fast and bright. The other kids listened anyway, not because they understood, but because his excitement was contagious. His passion made science sound like magic. At home, Rigo's curiosity knew no bounds. The garage became his laboratory, cluttered with wires, batteries, old radios, and anything else he could scavenge. He'd spend hours tinkering, inventing gadgets that whirred, beeped, or flashed with lights. One time, he surprised everyone at show and tell by rolling in a robot he'd cobbled together from old RC car parts and a broken toy dog. The thing actually followed simple voice commands, which made the whole class stare in awe. Even the teacher had to pick her jaw up off the floor. That day, the whispers started. When Rigo gets his quirk, he'll be an amazing hero. For most kids, the idea of becoming a pro-hero was the ultimate dream: fame, adventure, and the chance to save lives. Everyone fantasized about what their quirks would be and how they'd use them for good. But Rigo was different. Heroes were fine, he admired them like anyone else, but he cared more about discovery than glory, more about unraveling the mysteries of the universe than donning a cape or striking poses for the crowd. If anything, he dreamed of inventing something that could change the world, like Dr. Banner, the scientist hero whose research had revolutionized energy and science as a whole. His mother, Sayaka, was his greatest supporter. She saw the light in her son's eyes and nurtured it tenderly, always reminding him that kindness and curiosity went hand in hand. "Curious hearts make gentle souls, Rigo," she would say, smoothing his hair as he recited facts about molecules or black holes. "Keep learning. Keep shining." She made sure he knew that wonder was something to be cherished, not outgrown. But his father, Gariki, was another matter entirely. Gariki was a man of action, strong and stoic, with the calloused hands and broad shoulders of someone who'd spent his life fighting. He had his own idea of what it meant to be a hero, and it didn't involve test tubes or textbooks. Chemistry? He shrugged it off. Dr. Banner's research? He couldn't care less. Rigo's inventions and dreams? They were met with indifference at best and thinly veiled disappointment at worst. Gariki wanted a hero in the old-fashioned sense, a warrior, tough and unyielding, someone who could take a hit and dish one out. "When you get your quirk," he'd say, his voice like gravel, gauntlets gleaming in his grip. "You'll train with me. You'll be strong like me. A real Shizurashi man." He never said they. To him, it was unthinkable that his son might not inherit a power. The thought wasn't just foreign, it was impossible. So Rigo nodded, swallowing any protests, forcing a smile and pushing down the worry that twisted in his chest. He wanted to make his father proud, even if it meant hiding the parts of himself that didn't fit Gariki's vision. Sometimes, late at night, he'd whisper, "I still want to learn science, Papa." Like Dr. Banner, hoping just once for approval. But Gariki would only laugh, ruffling Rigo's hair as if dismissing a silly dream. "That soft brain won't save you. Only strength matters in this world." To Gariki, intellect was a luxury, real value lay in muscle and power. At 4 years old, Rigo believed him. At 4, he still looked up to his father, still wanted to be just like him. He clung to the hope that maybe, one day, he'd find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. But everything changed the day they went to the doctor. The appointment was just supposed to be routine, but when the results came back, everything Rigo thought he knew about himself and about what his future might hold was thrown into question. "Your son doesn't have a quirk." "I'm sorry." The words drifted through the room, heavy and final, like a door quietly closing forever. For a moment, no one spoke. Everything seemed to freeze in place, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant drone of traffic, even the sunlight slanting through the curtains. Sayaka's breath shuddered in her chest. She pulled Rigo into her arms, holding him tightly, as if she could shield him from a reality that had already found its way in. Rigo's wide eyes darted between the adults, confusion etched across his face. He was too young to grasp the full meaning, but he could sense the sorrow, the disappointment, the tremor in his mother's voice. But Gariki, his reaction was immediate and raw. His smile, always so quick and bright, vanished in a heartbeat. His lips pressed into a thin, bitter line, and his jaw clenched hard enough that a muscle twitched along his cheek. He looked at Rigo not as a son, not as a child, but as something unfamiliar, something that didn't fit. "A defect," he muttered, the words barely escaping, rough and cold. It was as if he was spitting out poison. Sayaka's head snapped up, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Gariki, don't call our son that." Her voice trembled, equal parts fear and anger. There was a desperate plea in her tone, begging him to take it back, to see Rigo for who he was rather than what he lacked. But the damage was instant, irreversible. In that single moment, the world they'd built as a family began to fracture. The warmth that had once filled their home evaporated, replaced by a bitter chill. Meals became silent, heavy affairs. Conversations turned into cautious exchanges, everyone skirting around a new, unspoken wound. Rigo, once so bright and eager, grew quieter, shrinking into himself as though trying to disappear. Sayaka felt the shift every day, the way Gariki withdrew, the way he looked at their son with something like disappointment, maybe even shame. The laughter that used to echo in the halls faded, replaced by the ache of things unsaid. The house itself seemed to mourn, the walls bearing quiet witness to a family unraveling. From that day on, the place they had called home became just a house, an empty shell, echoing with the memory of what had been lost. As soon as the door clicked shut, Gariki's entire demeanor shifted. The charming public persona, the easy smile, the gentle voice evaporated like mist under harsh sunlight. Now, with no one left to witness, he let the mask fall. There were no reporters peering in through the windows, no adoring fans calling his name from the street, no blinking red lights of cameras to keep his anger in check. The world outside might have praised him, even idolized him, but within these four walls, Gariki didn't care about admiration or love. Here, power was all that counted, and he wielded it with ruthless certainty. Sayaka was always the first to draw his ire. It started with sharp words, accusations that came out of nowhere, each one calculated to wound. But words were never enough. Soon, they were followed by a slap, a rough shove that sent her stumbling, and hands that left bruises in hidden places. The violence was sudden, unpredictable, a storm that could break at any moment. She learned to move quietly, to keep her head down and her voice soft, but it never made a difference. Nothing did. Rigo tried to stay invisible, but it was impossible not to make mistakes. He was just a child, after all. If he forgot to put his shoes away, or if his footsteps were too loud, or if he dropped his cup at dinner, Gariki would explode. The man's voice thundered through the house, echoing off the walls until it seemed to fill every room. He would grab Rigo by the arm, yanking him so hard it hurt, or strike him with an open hand. Sometimes, the punishments were silent and cold, a glare that froze Rigo in place, or hours spent alone in his room, listening to Gariki's rage through the thin walls. One night, the fear reached a new peak. Gariki cornered Rigo in the hallway, pressing him back against the cold plaster. His fist twisted in the boy's shirt, pulling him up so their faces were only inches apart. The anger in Gariki's eyes was terrifying, a darkness that seemed to swallow all the light from the room. "You don't talk about this. To anyone. Got it?" Gariki's voice was low, but every word was laced with threat. "Not a single word. You say something and you'll regret it." Rigo nodded, his lips trembling, the tears already welling in his eyes. He could barely breathe, his small body rigid with fear. "We don't leave this house unless I say so. You hear me?" Gariki demanded, voice rising until it shook the air. Another nod, even smaller than before. Rigo didn't dare look away. He didn't dare move. He was only 4 years old. He didn't understand why this was happening, not really. All he knew was that the man he'd once admired, the man whose stories he'd listened to with wide eyes, was gone. In his place stood someone unrecognizable, someone whose presence filled every corner of the house with dread. What remained was confusion and a quiet, gnawing sadness, as if a light had gone out inside him and he wasn't sure it would ever come back. One night, Rigo curled up next to his mom on the old, sagging couch, his small body racked with shivers and silent sobs after another one of his meltdowns. The living room was dim, the muted glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper. Sayaka's arms, already mottled with fresh and fading bruises, wrapped around him with unwavering gentleness. Despite the pain, she never flinched, her fingers weaving slowly and steadily through his tangled hair, offering what comfort she could. "Mama?" Rigo's voice trembled, so soft it barely rose above the hum of the refrigerator. "Am I a freak? Like Papa says?" Sayaka's heart fractured, the ache almost physical. She could feel the tremors in his thin shoulders, the way he tried to make himself smaller, to disappear. She pulled him closer, as if she could shield him from every cruel word and harsh glare. "No, baby. Look at me." She slipped her fingers under his chin, tilting his tear-streaked face up until their eyes met. Her own eyes shimmered with unshed tears, reflecting a fierce love and a desperate sorrow. "You're not a freak. You're kind, Rigo, kinder than anyone I know. You're smart and you're so brave. Braver than I ever was at your age." She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, lingering there for a moment, wishing she could transfer all her strength into him. "Listen to me," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "You don't need some special power to help people or to matter. Trust me, Rigo. There are so many ways to change the world, ways even All Might can't imagine. Your worth isn't measured by what you can do, but by who you are. Your father doesn't see that, but I do. I know you'll do amazing things, not because you have some quirk, but because you're you. And that's enough. That's more than enough." The words hung between them, a fragile shield against the darkness outside and the cruelty that sometimes invaded their home. Rigo clung to her, burying his face in her shirt, soaking it with desperate tears. Sayaka rocked him gently, humming an old lullaby from her own childhood, her hands never ceasing their soothing motion. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, drawing comfort where they could. In the quiet, they both wished achingly, fervently that things would change, that the hurt would ease, that hope would find its way in. But deep down, Sayaka knew the truth. The bruises would keep coming, the world would stay harsh, and hope would remain a distant, flickering thing. Still, in that moment, she held her son as tightly as she could, refusing to let go, determined to give him every ounce of love she had, even if it could never be enough to make the pain disappear. Over at the Fukushima research facility, Gariki pulled his car into the parking lot with a force that made the tires screech, knuckles white on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so tight it ached, but he barely registered the pain. The air inside the car was thick with unsaid words, the memory of yet another morning spent avoiding his own son's gaze. He was done pretending, done suffocating under the same roof as that quirkless disappointment who called him Dad with those wide, hopeful eyes. Every time he looked at the boy, Gariki felt something curdle inside him. It was more than disgust. It was fear, revulsion, a sense of betrayal so deep it felt like poison in his veins. He couldn't stop the thought, he's going to ruin me. My reputation, my legacy, everything I've sacrificed. All the years spent polishing the Shizurashi name, all the glory he'd claimed as Atomo's, the pro-hero who never flinched, all of it threatened by the simple fact that his own flesh and blood had been born powerless. Pathetic. He'd always imagined a son who would surpass him, a successor worthy of the family's legend, someone who would make the world tremble in awe. Instead, all he got was a weakling with his mother's soft heart, a boy obsessed with science and childish fantasies. He blamed his wife for that, her idealistic nonsense, her belief in a better world, her insistence that quirks didn't define a person. She dragged their son down, made him believe in fairy tales and heroes who saved the day with brains instead of strength. Worst of all was the boy's idolization of Dr. Bruce Banner. Banner Gariki could barely stand to say the name. That man was everything Gariki despised. A scientist who put hope before power, who wasted his gifts trying to save the unworthy. The kid's room was plastered with posters and diagrams, green and purple scrawls documenting Banner's breakthroughs. The boy talked about science like it was magic, like it could make even the powerless into something worthwhile. Gariki seethed at the thought. Banner was famous, sure, a big shot in the global science community, but to Gariki he was weak, naive, out of touch with what mattered in this world. Maybe he had a quirk, maybe not, Gariki didn't care. He hated Banner's guts on principle alone. And don't even get him started on All Might, another symbol of everything wrong with society, all that talk about peace and justice hiding the fact that only power truly mattered. The Shizurashi clan had always prided themselves on their quirks' abilities that only grew stronger with every generation. For them, life was simple, survival of the fittest. The strong rose above, the weak vanished. Gariki had seen it his whole life, villains cowering at the sight of power, the world bending to those who could enforce their will. That was how All Might built his legend, not with kindness, but with unstoppable strength. Gariki missed that world, missed the days when strength was all that mattered, when the weak had no choice but to bow before the strong. He wanted that feeling again, the feeling of being a god among mortals. But those days were gone, replaced by a society that coddled the weak, celebrated the powerless, and tried to tell him that his son was enough, just as he was. But then, rumors started swirling around the lab. Whispers traded between nervous technicians, stories about Banner's latest project, gamma radiation. This wasn't just another clean energy initiative, another empty promise to the public. No, this was something new, something dangerous, something powerful. Gariki's mind raced. Maybe, just maybe, this was the key. Maybe gamma energy could do what quirks never had: rewrite fate itself. Maybe he could use it to fix his son, to turn him into more than just another disappointment. He could be more than Atomos. He could be a god. His heart pounded with a twisted sense of hope, something dark and hungry. He strode into the research facility, not bothering with the fake smiles and handshakes he used for the cameras due to his ego and fame, which he thought nobody would care 'cause of his status. He found a young man behind the front desk, a clipboard in hand, and fixed him with a glare that could melt steel. He told the employee there exactly what he came here for. The employee's eyes widened, his mouth falling open in disbelief. You want to what? Gariki didn't have time for this. He folded his arms, radiating impatience. I said, I want some of Dr. Banner's gamma energy. Let me borrow it. The young man blinked rapidly, struggling to process what he was hearing. Borrow? Sir, we haven't even finished testing that stuff. Gamma radiation isn't a toy. Why would you even? Gariki leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. To give my son power. The man's hands trembled. The clipboard nearly slipped from his grasp. 5-year-old son. Gariki's patience snapped like a brittle twig. He won't stay quirkless. I won't let him. A little gamma exposure will jumpstart something inside him. You'll see. The employee recoiled, shock and horror etched across his face. Are you insane? That stuff is experimental. It's for energy, not for people. You can't just waltz in here and demand we hand it over for your kid. Gamma radiation is dangerous. Exposure could kill him. You'd be signing his death warrant. Dr. Banner would never. Gariki's eyes narrowed, his glare icy. Get me Banner. I want his approval. Now. He's busy, the employee stammered, voice wavering. Even if he wasn't, he'd never agree. Sir, this is dangerous. It's unethical. Honestly? It's just stupid. That word hit Gariki like a slap. Stupid. That was what everyone always whispered about him behind closed doors when he refused to play by their rules, refused to accept the hand he'd been dealt. His face twisted with barely suppressed rage. You people are useless, he spat. The employee's voice shook, but there was a note of pleading in it now. Why are you even doing this? He's your son. Shouldn't you? Support him? Accept him? He's still your child, quirks or not. For a split second, something flickered in Gariki's eyes, a storm cloud of guilt, maybe, or just the memory of the boy's face, so eager for approval. But the mask snapped back down hard. He leaned closer, voice cold and sharp as broken glass. I will never accept a defect like him. The employee stared, aghast. Gariki straightened, and his words turned venomous, each syllable dripping with contempt. Do you ever want to know why I became a hero? It's because I am strong. You know that old saying, the weak die and the strong survive? That's my clan's way. The Shizurashi way. Only people with strong, flashy quirks matter. That's probably why All Might got to the top raw, overwhelming power. Not brains. Not heart. Power. He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing through the sterile lobby. The employee flinched as though struck. My son is dead weight. His brains mean nothing in this world. I'll make him strong whether he likes it or not. I won't let him drag me down. The man behind the desk looked at Gariki with a mix of horror and disgust, his voice tight and trembling but also in caged fury. Get out, he said, each word scraped raw. Get out before I call the cops and perhaps an actual hero. Gariki let out a sharp, cruel laugh. What are they gonna do? Arrest me? I'm too famous. Too strong. I've been like that before that blonde oaf came here and took that away from me. The public right now thinks I'm a saint. Even if you talk, no one will believe you. This world only listens to power and I have it. He turned on his heel, his presence leaving a chill in the air, and tossed one last sneer over his shoulder. Oh, and if none of you will help, then I'll handle it myself. He stalked out, the door swinging shut behind him with a final, heavy thud. For a long moment, the employee stood frozen, heart hammering, stomach twisting with dread. He looked down at his shaking hands, then at the phone on the desk. But he then closed his eyes and clenched his hands into fists in outrage. He couldn't believe this man, this supposed hero had just came and said that to him, straight to his face, about using gamma radiation to give his son power. This man was insane. It almost sounds like he wants to kill his son. He wouldn't, would he? Could he have possibly tried this many times over before coming here? Sounds like more like a villain to me. Yeah, we'll see about that. The employee said in resolve, as he snatched the phone and immediately called the police and a real hero so he could possibly end this man's whole career before trauma sets its course. Hell, that man's career was already over to begin with. Hello? Police? Yeah, I need you to check the home of the pro-hero Atomos. Yeah, that guy. I don't know about you, but I think something bad is about to happen. Please. You have to hurry. He could only hope they would listen. Because deep down, he knew sometimes the most dangerous monsters were the ones who believed they were gods. It was nearly midnight, the world outside cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence, when Gariki smashed through the front door. The impact was so violent the glass in the windows sang with the aftershock, trembling in their frames as if they Two were afraid. Sayaka. His voice was a guttural roar, thick with fury and desperation, echoing down the darkened hallway. Where's Rigo? For once, Sayaka didn't shrink from him. She stood firm a wall between Gariki and the rest of the house, her fists clenched tight at her sides. What do you want with him, Gariki? Why are you doing this? Gariki's glare cut through the gloom, sharp and unforgiving. That's not your business. Move aside. But Sayaka's voice didn't waver. It is my business. He's my son. You're not touching him, not tonight. The challenge in her tone made something snap behind Gariki's eyes, turning them glassy and cold. He took a step closer, looming over her. You're talking back to me now? After everything I've done for this family? Words collided, sharp and brittle, the tension twisting tighter with every second. Then, in an instant, the world erupted, shouting, fists slamming into walls, a chair skidding across the floor and toppling over, the crash of wood and splinters. The room became chaos, every sound amplifying the fear that had simmered for so long. Down the dark corridor, Rigo, small and trembling, peered around the doorframe of his bedroom. His eyes were huge, wet with terror. Mama? Papa? His voice was barely more than a whisper, fragile as spun glass. Sayaka twisted around, scrambling for calm, her lips pulling into a strained smile that couldn't hide the panic etched on her face. Rigo, honey, please go to your room. Lock the door. Please, just do what I say. But Gariki was faster. He lunged, his massive hands snaring Rigo's shirt, jerking him out into the open. Rigo's feet barely touched the ground before Gariki slammed him against the wall, the sound reverberating through the house. You ruined everything. Gariki's voice cracked, raw and vicious. My future was flawless until you came along. You're nothing but a curse. Gariki, stop. Sayaka hurled herself at him, arms outstretched, desperation making her reckless. With a savage shove, Gariki sent her sprawling into the dining table. The edge caught her in the ribs. She gasped in pain as the tabletop split beneath her weight. Glass dishes shattered, raining glittering shards across the floor, slicing into her arms and hands as she tried to break her fall. Rigo's scream pierced the chaos. Papa, please. Don't hurt Mama. Please, please stop. But Gariki was beyond reason, lost in a storm of rage that had been building for years. Maybe he couldn't hear Rigo's cries over the pounding of his own heart. Maybe he didn't care anymore. He rounded on Sayaka, his face twisted, voice dripping venom. You gave birth to a broken child. You destroyed our clan. Our bloodline is tainted because of you. Then the blows came hard, relentless, each one fueled by bitter resentment. Sayaka's body curled in on itself, trying to shield her head and chest, but there was nowhere to hide. The room filled with the dull, sickening thud of fists meeting flesh. Rigo, sobbing uncontrollably, threw himself at his father, clawing frantically at Gariki's arm. Leave her alone. Please. Stop it, Papa. Gariki spun, his hand lashing out. The back of his palm caught Rigo across the face with enough force to send the boy flying, landing hard on the floor. Rigo lay there, stunned, blood trickling from his lip, confusion and terror clouding his face. Sayaka staggered upright, blood painting her mouth, her vision swimming. Through her haze of pain, she saw her son lying crumpled, and something primal surged within her. She tried to crawl to him, arms reaching. But Gariki's hand closed around her throat. He strengthened himself with his quirk, making his grip merciless, fingers digging in and cutting off her air, her own esophagus. Sayaka's eyes widened, panic flaring as she fought for breath. No, no, Mama. Rigo screamed, his voice cracking, heartbreak echoing in every syllable. Gariki's face was monstrous, twisted by hate, unrecognizable as the man Sayaka had once loved, or one she had been lied to. He stared down at her, eyes empty, as if she was already gone. Sayaka's hands fluttered weakly at his wrists, nails scraping uselessly. She looked at Rigo, her gaze locking with his one last, desperate attempt to reassure him, to say goodbye without words. Her arms fell limp. Her body sagged, lifeless. The world seemed to freeze for Rigo, all sound faded, replaced by a ringing, hollow and endless. "Mama?" His voice was so small, lost in the vastness of silence. "Mama?" Gariki released her, letting her body crumple to the floor. He turned on Rigo, eyes wild, devoid of any warmth or remorse. "Don't worry," he spat, voice a snarl. "You'll suffer for this. I'll make sure you feel every bit of pain you brought me before you die." He seized Rigo by the arm, yanking him upright. Rigo whimpered, twisting, but Gariki's grip was iron. But before Gariki could drag him away, the front door exploded inward. A dozen uniformed officers surged into the house, flashlights glaring, voices barking orders. "Police! Drop the boy! Hands where we can see them!" Pro-heroes in bright costumes followed, moving with purposeful precision. The air pulsed with authority and hope, a lifeline thrown into the nightmare. Gariki bared his teeth, eyes darting, wild and cornered. He pulled Rigo closer, shielding himself with the trembling boy. But Rigo, seeing his mother's lifeless corpse, risen something in him. Something that had grew within from all the abuse inflicted by his father. Whatever it was, it caused him to bite his father's hand, forcing him to run and escape to safety. Gariki tried to grab the boy and kill him with his quirk, but it was too late. Strong hands charged up and wrested Gariki as officers and pros formed a protective shield around Rigo. "Let go of me!" Gariki screamed, thrashing and kicking, his voice unraveling into madness. "It's his fault. He ruined everything. He's the curse." It took 3 pros to subdue him, pinning him to the floor as he howled and fought, spittle flying as they slapped the quirk-suppressant cuffs on him. With every word, the illusion of family shattered further. All the while, Rigo sobbed in an officer's arms, his small body shaking uncontrollably. He clung to the stranger, the only anchor left in a world that had splintered beyond recognition. The lights blurred, the room spinning, sounds distorting as if underwater. Outside, sirens wailed, a mournful chorus for everything that had been lost. And as the officers carried Rigo away from the devastation, the boy's tears fell silent, each one a memory of the life that would never return. Word spread like wildfire. News traveled faster than anyone could have predicted within hours. It seemed like everyone in the hero community was whispering, speculating, demanding answers that no one seemed willing or able to give. The big names were restless. All Might himself was seen pacing the corridors, jaw tight, eyes stormy with worry and disbelief. Even Endeavor, who was notorious for keeping his emotions under wraps, looked visibly disturbed. The lines around his mouth deepened, and his usual composure faltered at the mention of the incident. For a man already haunted by complicated family entanglements, this new scandal hit perilously close to home. Yet when the Hero Public Safety Commission made their statement, it was as if a wall had slammed down in front of everyone's faces. No explanations, no transparency, just a cold, clipped dismissal. "It's a private family matter," they repeated, their voices hard and practiced, shutting down every attempt at questioning. No one believed them. Whispers filled the air, suspicion mounting. The commission's evasiveness only added more fuel to the fire, making the silence heavier, more ominous. But for now, that was the end of it. The file was closed, the truth locked away in a vault of bureaucracy and secrets. Detective Tsukachi was one of the few allowed any access at all. He took his chance, kneeling down beside Rigo, just a little boy, barely 5, trembling as if the ground had turned to ice beneath him. The detective's heart twisted at the sight. Rigo's small fists clenched in his lap, eyes wide and unfocused, staring at a point far beyond the bland interrogation room walls. Tsukachi lowered his voice, trying to make himself small and gentle, someone the child could trust. "Rigo," he said quietly, "can you tell me what happened? Anything at all?" But Rigo was locked away inside himself, unreachable. He didn't speak. He barely moved. His lips quivered, his chin trembled, but no words escaped. The trauma was so fresh, so raw, that it seemed to have stolen his voice entirely. Tsukachi's throat tightened. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him, not just as a detective, but as someone who had sworn to protect the vulnerable. He forced himself to keep his composure. I'm so sorry about your mom, he managed, voice thick. We all wish we'd known. Maybe we could have helped. He couldn't bring himself to look at Rigo for more than a moment. The guilt and fury simmered just beneath his calm exterior, threatening to burst free. The man responsible had outsmarted them all, had slipped through the cracks, leaving devastation in his wake. That man made fools of us, Tsukachi muttered bitterly, half to himself but loud enough for the room to hear. Every single one. He rose and placed a comforting hand on Rigo's small shoulder, guiding him gently down the sterile hallway. In that quiet moment he saw the tears silent, steady, tracing down the boy's face, dripping from his chin to the floor. Tsukachi's jaw clenched, his fist curling tight at his side. The urge to promise justice, to swear vengeance, burned in his chest, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't guarantee. One day, he whispered, voice trembling with conviction, I hope you'll be able to tell us everything. We'll be waiting for you, Rigo. However long it takes. And as he walked the boy away from the chaos, Tsukachi silently vowed that the truth would not stay buried forever. He couldn't bring himself to look at Rigo for more than a moment. The guilt and fury simmered just beneath his calm exterior, threatening to burst free. The man responsible had outsmarted them all, had slipped through the cracks, leaving devastation in his wake. That man made fools of us, Tsukachi muttered bitterly, half to himself but loud enough for the room to hear. Every single one. He rose and placed a comforting hand on Rigo's small shoulder, guiding him gently down the sterile hallway. In that quiet moment he saw the tears silent, steady, tracing down the boy's face, dripping from his chin to the floor. Tsukachi's jaw clenched, his fist curling tight at his side. The urge to promise justice, to swear vengeance, burned in his chest, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't guarantee. One day, he whispered, voice trembling with conviction, I hope you'll be able to tell us everything. We'll be waiting for you, Rigo. However long it takes. And as he walked the boy away from the chaos, Tsukachi silently vowed that the truth would not stay buried forever. Rigo's mother's cousins arrived several hours later, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow, eyes rimmed red from crying or lack of sleep. It was hard to tell. They hesitated in the doorway, grief hanging thick in the air like a fog that refused to lift. Reiko Tadashima was the first to move. She slipped past her parents without a word, crossing the room in long, urgent strides before dropping to her knees in front of Rigo. She was only a few years older than him, but in that moment she carried herself with a steadiness far beyond her age, as if she'd already decided that no matter how heavy this night became, she would bear it. Without hesitation, Reiko wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, firm, unyielding. Rigo, she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm here. You're safe now. I promise. Behind her, her mother pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes shining with unshed tears, while her father stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. He swallowed hard before stepping forward, placing a gentle hand on Reiko's shoulder. You don't have to be strong alone, he said quietly, his voice rough. We're here too. Rigo didn't respond. He couldn't. His body felt locked in place, every muscle braced against a pain too large to understand. The world had narrowed to the sound of his own breathing, shallow and uneven. But Reiko didn't let go. She held him as if she meant to anchor him to the floor, to the present, to something solid and real. And slowly, something inside Rigo cracked. The walls he'd built over the endless night finally gave way, and the tears came, hot and uncontrollable, spilling down his cheeks as he clutched at her shirt with shaking hands. Reiko tightened her grip, resting her chin against his hair. You don't have to be brave right now, she murmured. We'll take care of you. In that moment, surrounded by grief but not alone in it, the weight on Rigo's chest eased just enough for him to breathe. The pain didn't disappear, but it shifted, shared among arms that refused to let him fall. And for the first time since everything shattered, that was enough. However, things will be a little better and worse later on in life, for our dear Rigo. End of chapter. 3 years have slipped by since blood soaked the Darame Inn. The Shizurashi house. Time didn't heal the wound, it simply covered it with a thin layer of frost, A brittle hush that muffled but never erased the ache pulsing beneath. Rigo is 8 now, living with the Tadashimas, a family whose home glows with a warmth that's both unfamiliar and almost too gentle. Their laughter rises and falls in soft waves, their voices careful, as if afraid that a sudden noise might shatter what's left of him. Reiko and her parents go out of their way to fill the gaps, to mend the quiet places where grief has settled, but a hollow ache lives inside Rigo now, silent and deep, like a fault line buried under ordinary earth, easy to miss, dangerous to ignore. Around the neighborhood, people still mutter about the boy who watched his mother die. At first, neighbors offered awkward smiles, eyes darting away when he came near, their pity stretched thin and uncomfortable. Those gestures faded quickly, replaced by a colder kind of avoidance, a shutting of doors and soft footsteps that retreated when he passed. When Rigo's quirk assessment came back stamped, "quirkless," the word itself seemed to freeze the air. The letters were pressed into official paper with a hardness that felt final, as though someone had decided he would never belong. After that, most folks avoided him altogether, as if misfortune could be contagious. He was so smart. What a shame, adults whispered, their voices drifting behind him like the trail of ashes from a dying fire. Doesn't matter if he's smart if he's got nothing special, the playground kids decided, circling the swing set and shutting him out without a second thought. At school, he became an island. Desks scraped across the floor as classmates dragged them away from his, the sound harsh and deliberate, building a moat too wide to cross. Laughter, sharp and stinging, echoed through the halls, never directed at his face, but always close enough to sting. Some days, it wrapped around him so tightly he could barely breathe. No matter how small he tried to make himself, no matter how quietly he moved, the world always seemed to notice him just enough to remind him he didn't fit. So Rigo learned to hide his pain, folding it up and tucking it away like contraband beneath his pillow. He grew skilled at pretending, at smiling for Reiko when she gently asked about his day. "Fine," he'd say, with the perfect cadence of someone who's told the same lies so often it's become second nature. Everything that hurt, the jagged bits of loneliness and longing, he shoved deep inside, locking them behind ribs that felt tighter with each passing year. The teachers? They glanced right past him, never noticing the bruises on his confidence or the slow, sinking way hope disappeared from his eyes. Adults, he decided, were strange creatures, always saying they cared, but never really seeing what was right in front of them. Days blurred one into the next, monotony settling like dust. Then, without warning, everything shifted. One morning, the classroom door screeched open, its familiar squeal jarring in the quiet. A new boy stepped inside, hair dark green and wild, clutching his backpack straps with white-knuckled determination, as though afraid he might float away if he let go. His eyes swept the room, curious but gentle, reflecting back the world rather than slicing through it. "Class," the teacher announced with heavy indifference, "this is Daichi Morita. He's from Hyugo Elementary. Make him feel welcome." No one moved. The silence grew heavier, thick with the unspoken rule that newcomers fended for themselves. Daichi's gaze searched the room anyway, maybe hoping for a flicker of kindness. When he spotted the empty desk next to Rigo, he hesitated only a moment before crossing the distance, his smile small but genuine, the kind of smile that doesn't expect anything in return. "Hey," he whispered, voice low so only Rigo could hear, "I'm Daichi Morita. Nice to meet you." Rigo didn't respond. He slid further away, bracing himself for the ridicule he knew would come. He'd learned the hard way that nobody talked to the quirkless kid unless they were looking for a target. Daichi blinked, caught off guard but not discouraged. "First day," he tried again, forcing a little laugh. "This place is way bigger than my old school. Kinda easy to get lost." "You don't have to talk to me," Rigo muttered, keeping his eyes fixed on his notebook, his voice sharp with resignation. "You'll figure it out soon enough." Daichi tilted his head, genuinely puzzled. "Why wouldn't I want to talk to you?" Rigo's answer came out flat and heavy. "Because I'm quirkless." The word hung in the air, a cold weight. "Nobody here wants to be friends with a quirkless kid like me. There's no point." Instead of shrinking away, Daichi's eyebrows shot up, surprised but not repulsed. "So? My quirk's basically useless. He lifted his hand and pressed it flat against the desk. As Rigo watched, his hand faded, blending seamlessly into the wood grain. It's called chameleon. I can blend in. Sometimes. But I can't control it. Last time I tried, only my legs disappeared. Freaked everybody out at my old school. He grinned, the corner of his mouth twitching with self-mockery. People stopped talking to me after that, he admitted, voice softer. Guess being half invisible makes you easy to ignore. For a moment, Rigo looked at him, not through him, not around him, but directly at him. He saw the awkwardness, the vulnerability, the familiar ache of being pushed aside. Maybe Daichi wasn't just another kid passing through. Maybe he understood what it felt like to be left behind. People keep telling me power is what makes you matter, Daichi said, shrugging. But I think it's the people who stay that count. Daichi leaned in, dropping his voice to a near whisper. And honestly, I'd rather have a quirkless friend than no friends at all. The words settled over Rigo like a soft blanket, warming places he'd forgotten were cold. For the first time that day, his chest eased, the ache loosening just a little. It wasn't hope not yet, but it was the beginning of something softer, something that might, in time, grow into a reason to believe. It wasn't hope not yet, but it was the beginning of something softer. After school, Daichi invited him into his house as the two ventured there. Daichi's house greeted Rigo the moment he stepped inside, wrapping him up in a blanket of warmth he didn't know he was missing. The hallway carried the rich scent of something spicy, maybe curry, or maybe just the clean tang of floors freshly scrubbed. Every inch of wall space was covered in family photos, birthday cakes with too many candles, wild hair plastered to foreheads after a day at the beach, arms flung over shoulders, and laughter frozen in time. It was the kind of place where he could feel the years he lived in, the kind of place that made him want to stay, even if he didn't know why. Rigo hovered in the doorway, backpack clutched so tightly his knuckles whitened, caught between the urge to bolt and an unfamiliar hope that maybe, if he stood here long enough, he'd belong. From the kitchen, Daichi's mom appeared with a dish towel thrown over her shoulder, her eyes bright and curious. Daichi? Who have you brought home? Her voice lilting up at the end, as if every word was part of a song she sang just for them. Daichi's whole face split into a grin, overflowing with pride. Mom, Dad, this is Rigo. He's my friend. A man followed behind, hands stained with grease, wiping them on a rag as he walked. He looked every bit the dad who could fix anything from a leaking faucet to a broken heart. Rigo, is it? Good to meet you, son. I'm Morita Jiro. That's my wife, Hana. Hana's smile was gentle, so soft it made Rigo's chest ache. We're glad you're here, Rigo. Daichi hasn't brought a friend in. Oh, it's been quite some time. Daichi's cheeks flushed a brilliant red, but he laughed easily, a sound that bounced off the walls and made the house feel even more alive. Yeah, people sort of stopped hanging out with me once my quirk showed up. His dad chuckled, ruffling Daichi's hair with a grease-stained palm. Tough to get attention when you disappear into thin air, huh? Daichi grinned, a little sheepish, and shrugged. Yeah, pretty much. Makes it fun for hide-and-seek though. Then Hana turned her full attention to Rigo, her gaze so gentle and unguarded that for a moment it felt like sunlight after a long stretch of rain. You're welcome here any time, sweetheart. Our door's always open. Rigo tried to swallow the lump in his throat, his voice trembling despite his best effort to steady it. Thank you. Really, thank you. He willed his hands to stop shaking, but the kindness in the room seemed to seep right into his bones, making it impossible to hide how much it meant. Morita nodded with the satisfaction of a man who had just fixed something important. A friend like you is something to celebrate. Daichi's lucky to have you. There was a spark of pride in his voice, the kind that made Rigo wonder what it would feel like to hear that from your own father. Rigo almost said, "No, I'm not, I don't deserve this." But the words dissolved before they reached his lips, lost in the warmth that radiated from every corner, settling into the cracks he'd carried with him for so long. After that, Daichi then grabbed and headed to him to his room. You gotta check out my collection, he shouted, practically hauling him inside by the wrist, too excited to wait. Daichi's grip was urgent, his feet barely touching the cluttered floor as he dragged Rigo in, the door banging shut behind them. Daichi's room was a wild mess, stuff everywhere, in every conceivable nook, as if the very walls themselves were about to burst from the chaos. Hero trading cards spilled out from a shoebox, scattered across the rug like confetti after a parade. Each card was dog-eared and creased, evidence of countless imaginary battles. Rock band posters were taped up crooked on the walls, the edges curling, the faces of guitarists and drummers almost hidden behind overlapping layers. Their colors had faded, but their energy practically vibrated off the paper. Comics were stacked like unstable towers on every available surface. Some of the stacks leaned so precariously they looked like a stiff breeze would send them tumbling, but Daichi just navigated around them like he'd memorized their placement. A guitar leaned against the bed, battered, stickers peeling, one string conspicuously missing. The neck was scarred with dings, as if it had survived its own wild adventures. A radio sat on the desk, caked in dust, its casing half removed, wires sticking out in tangles. It looked like it was in the middle of being dissected or reanimated. A glass jar crammed with marbles glinted from a shelf, the spheres catching the afternoon sunlight and painting little rainbows on the walls. Science magazines lined up neatly on another shelf, every cover shouting Bruce Banner's name in bold letters, issue after issue chronicling discoveries, experiments, and impossible feats. It was clear these were prized above all else. Daichi swept his arms wide, his eyes shining with pride. "Welcome to the ultimate den of awesomeness," he declared, as if unveiling a secret base that only the worthy could enter. There was a sense of ceremony in his voice, as though this mess was sacred ground. Rigo's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but closer than he'd been in ages. His eyes flicked over the clutter, lingering on the chaotic collections and odd inventions. The room felt alive, humming with the energy of 1,000 half-finished dreams. "You actually like all this?" Rigo asked, eyeing a shelf cluttered with mechanical junk, old gears, wires, springs, and tools that looked like they'd been scavenged from a robot graveyard. "Totally," Daichi replied without missing a beat. "I build stuff all the time. Usually it just falls apart. Sometimes it explodes. Explosions are way better." He grinned, a mischievous gleam in his eyes, as if he relished the unpredictability of his creations. "That's not safe," Rigo said, his voice soft but edged with honest concern. He picked up a strange contraption, something between a clock and a slingshot, patched together with tape and hope. Daichi just grinned and shrugged. "Who wants to be safe if it means being bored? Besides, half the fun is seeing what happens next. If everything worked perfectly, I'd never learn anything new." His voice held a quiet conviction, as if he'd already decided that adventure was worth the risk. Rigo picked up one of the magazines, thumb brushing Bruce Banner's name like a secret handshake. "You've got a lot of his journals," he said, his voice almost reverent. The pages were worn at the edges, highlighted and annotated in Daichi's scrawled handwriting. "Yeah man, Mr. Banner's the best scientist ever," Daichi said, no hesitation, no doubt. He spoke like he was reciting a universal truth. "You want to be a scientist too, don't you?" Rigo nodded, barely. "Yeah. To help people. To save them. So nobody ends up like..." He stopped abruptly, his words trailing off into silence. His shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of memory pressing down on him. Daichi didn't press, didn't ask for more. Instead, he just dropped down next to him, bumping shoulders, and grinned. "Then I'm in. You go be the genius, and I'll be your sidekick. Or mascot. You know, human shields. Whatever you need. Somebody's got your back, no matter what." There was a steadiness in his voice, a promise wrapped in humor. And Rigo, who never laughed, let out this weird, shaky sound. It was almost a laugh. Not perfect, not pretty, but real. The kind of sound that came from deep inside, breaking through layers of sadness and silence. For a moment, the mess faded into the background, and all that mattered was the possibility that things could get better, one experiment, one explosion, one laugh at a time. For the first time since his mom died, Rigo didn't feel so alone. The feeling snuck up on him, quiet and unexpected, like a sunrise you're not looking for until it's already coloring everything. He moved slow, lingering with each step, his eyes drifting across Daichi's shelves. Posters of old-school heroes stared back at him: Superman, Goku, Sailor Moon, each one mid-pose, like they might leap to life at any second. Comic books were stacked everywhere, some slumped in leaning towers, others fanned out in neat rows as if waiting for someone to pick up an adventure right where they left off. Model rockets crowded the top shelf, fins glinting in the slanted afternoon light, and that half-finished robot still glared out from the corner. Its metal jaw was crooked, wires trailing out of its chest like exposed nerves. Rigo wondered if the robot would ever get finished, or if it would just sit there forever, stuck between becoming something big and just being part of the mess. The room was a riot of color and energy, but it was comforting, a kind of chaos that made sense. Everywhere Rigo looked, there was some project in progress, some idea caught halfway between dream and reality. He could almost pretend that nothing bad had ever happened here, that rooms like this could exist outside the reach of grief. A beat of silence stretched between them. Rigo hesitated, words caught up in his throat like pebbles in a stream. Then, finally, he spoke, voice small and careful. Daichi? Would you maybe want to meet my cousins sometime? Daichi's whole face lit up, like someone had flipped a switch inside him. Yeah, totally. Wait, why not your parents? The question landed hard, like the floor dropping out from under him, all the air sucked out of the room at once. Rigo's whole body jerked, a flinch he couldn't hide. He stared down at his shoes, scuffed and dirty from too many walks to nowhere. I don't want to talk about that, he whispered, shoulders hunching in on themselves. Daichi didn't push. His eyes softened with understanding, and he let the moment hang, unforced. You don't have to. He thumped his chest with a fist, cartoon hero style, trying to make Rigo laugh. And hey, if you ever want to talk about real stuff, you can tell me. I'm a certified homie. That got Rigo to snort, even if he tried to hide it behind his hand. The laugh was small, but it felt like a crack in a wall he'd built too high. Daichi grinned, sensing victory, and leaned into the joke. It's an ancient title, you know, handed down through generations. Like, super official. Anyway, I should check if my parents are cool with meeting yours. He stumbled over the words, catching his own mistake. Your cousins? Sorry. He bounced out of the room, the energy in him barely contained, like he couldn't stand still for long. Back in a sec. The door clicked shut, and suddenly the room was quiet again, but not empty. Rigo stood in the middle of it, letting the weird, patchwork warmth settle over him. He traced the clutter with his gaze: robots, comics, rockets, each thing a piece of Daichi's world, each thing a sign that life could keep moving even when it had been derailed. The place buzzed, not just with electricity but with possibility, with the sense that good things could still happen. For a fleeting second, Rigo was back in his own room from before, just a flash, his mom's arms tucking him in, her voice soft and steady, the shadow of his dad in the doorway, everything still safe and ordinary. The memory hurt, but it didn't swallow him whole. He blinked it away, grounding himself in the present. Then the door banged open, and Daichi burst back in, practically bouncing on his toes. They said yes. We can go this weekend. I'll tell my cousins. For the first time in a long time, the words felt like a promise. The moment Rigo stepped into the Tadashima house, the air shifted. Usually, he brought a kind of hush with him, like everyone had to tiptoe around his mood. Not this time. There was a buzz in the room, enough to make Reiko and her parents look up, eyebrows raised. His face, always a little guarded, almost wary, actually opened up. There was a real smile there. Hana and Misato caught each other's eyes, both thinking the same thing. Something big just happened. Rigo, Reiko called out, her voice gentle but full of questions. Different. His eyes actually sparkled. For once, he didn't have to force his words, they just tumbled out. I made a friend, he said, way louder and faster than usual. His name's Daichi. He sits next to me in class, and he doesn't care that I'm quirkless. Hana drifted closer, hands clasped, soaking in every syllable. Misato leaned forward, completely drawn in by this new version of his nephew, so animated, so alive. He's got this chameleon quirk, Rigo went on, hands flying everywhere. Usually he barely moved at all. But he can't control it. Sometimes just his arm or his head disappears. Everyone at his old school started ignoring him because of it, but he doesn't let it get to him. He's actually really funny. Rigo kept going, barely pausing for breath. He described Daichi's messy room, piling detail on detail. He's got stacks of hero cards, comics everywhere, this half-built robot that looks like it's about to fall apart, and a bunch of science magazines about Dr. Banner. He told me he wants to be my sidekick, or maybe my human shield. Rigo's voice wobbled, and for a second his eyes went shiny. He said nobody else wants to be friends with a quirkless kid, but he does. He really actually wants to. Reiko couldn't stop a tear from slipping down her face. She'd watched Rigo close himself off. For so long now here he was, overflowing with hope. Masato cleared his throat. His voice sounded rough, thick with emotion. Should we meet Daichi? Maybe his folks too? Rigo's whole face lit up. Yeah. He already asked his parents, and they said yes. He called himself a certified homie, and promised he'd always have my back. The Tadashimas all looked at each other, no hiding it this time. Pure hope right there on their faces. This was more than a new friend. This was a lifeline. The kind of thing they'd hardly dared hope for. We can't wait to meet him, Hannah said, hugging Rigo tight. Suddenly, the weekend felt like more than just a plan. It felt like a door opening, a little bit of light finally shining in. Friday arrived humming with that familiar, restless charge, the kind of energy that creeps into your bones when the promise of the weekend is just out of reach, dangling like the last piece of candy in a jar. Every class felt like wading through molasses, each minute stretching longer than the one before, the clock stubbornly refusing to move. Rigo sat at his desk, keeping his head down but letting his gaze wander over to Daichi's seat more than once, each time pretending to be interested in something else, a stain on the wall, his own pencil, anything but the truth. And Daichi always caught him. Every single time, Daichi would flash that wild, infectious grin or twist his face into some exaggerated, ridiculous expression, the kind that threatened to shatter Rigo's carefully composed calm. More than once, Rigo had to look away, biting the inside of his cheek to keep from bursting out laughing and drawing the wrong kind of attention. When the lunch bell finally rang, slicing through the haze of boredom and anticipation, Daichi was out of his seat in a heartbeat, almost as if he'd been coiling up all morning for this exact escape. He slung his bag over his shoulder with a dramatic flourish, voice already echoing in the classroom as he called out, "Thank God. I'm starving." It was loud, unfiltered, and impossible not to notice. Come on, Rigo. If we don't hustle, all the good stuff's gone. His tone made it sound like lunch was some epic quest, and if they didn't hurry, they'd miss out on a legendary feast. Rigo took his time, a small rebellion against the sticky anxiety that usually weighed him down. Today, though, it felt a little lighter, like some tight knot in his chest had quietly come undone. He packed up, fingers moving more easily than usual, and offered a half-smile that was more real than most. Yeah, I'm coming," he said, the words slipping out softer than he meant but not forced. They walked down the hallway together, the air buzzing with the wild chatter of kids freed from the monotony of class. Daichi talked nonstop, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement to tell Rigo about a new science experiment. He wanted to try something with vinegar and baking soda, some wild plan that was almost certainly going to make a mess. "It's not gonna explode this time, I swear," Daichi insisted, eyes shining with mischief. Which, from Daichi, basically guaranteed a minor disaster. Rigo just shook his head, unable to hide a smirk. With Daichi, even the most mundane things seemed to carry the promise of chaos and laughter. But just as they neared the cafeteria doors, Rigo slowed his pace. There was a slight hitch in his step, hesitation sneaking into his voice. "Hang on, I gotta hit the bathroom," he said. Daichi pointed at the cafeteria, already half-turned toward the promise of food. "I'll be right here. Don't take forever, or I'll eat your lunch too." His grin was teasing, but underneath was the steady, unwavering support that Rigo had come to rely on, even if he never said it outright. Rigo managed another half-smile, but this one was tinged with nerves. "I'll be quick." He turned and walked away, shoulders tense, head down. Daichi watched Rigo go, his own smile fading just a touch as he leaned against the wall and pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through messages. The hallway buzzed with life students laughing, voices bouncing off the walls, the metallic clatter of trays and the distant scent of cafeteria food drifting through the air. It was a familiar chaos, comforting in its routine. But minutes ticked by. 7 of them. Daichi glanced at his phone, frowning. That was longer than usual. Maybe Rigo was waiting for the line at the sinks, or maybe he'd gotten caught up talking to someone. But the worry started small, a chill at the base of Daichi's spine. By 10 minutes, the chill had settled into something heavier. Daichi shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a creeping sense of dread swirling in his gut. He tried to shake it off. Rigo was probably fine, just a delay, a hiccup in the day. But that didn't stop his mind from racing, conjuring up every worst-case scenario. Finally, unable to wait any longer, he shoved his phone back into his pocket, heart thudding as he strode down the hall toward the bathrooms. The closer he got, the heavier the air seemed to grow, thickening with every step. He heard voices sharp, mocking, edged with the kind of meanness that made Daichi's skin crawl. Then a dull, echoing thud, followed by a gasp that made his blood run cold. Daichi didn't hesitate. He threw open the door, letting it slam against the wall. Inside, the scene hit him like a punch to the gut. Rigo was backed against the sinks, arms raised defensively, cornered by 3 older students, 2 boys and a girl, all wearing the same bored, predatory look. There was an easy cruelty in the way they held themselves, a confidence that came from knowing they could do what they wanted, that no one ever stopped them. The tallest boy, with hair spiked up like he'd spent hours perfecting it, had his hands wreathed in a strange, shimmering glow, and he just shoved Rigo hard enough to make him stumble into the porcelain. "What's wrong, you quirkless freak?" the boy taunted, voice dripping with contempt. "Can't even stand up?" The girl, her fingers crackling with visible electricity, leaned in, eyes alight with a twisted glee. "Maybe if you tried harder, you'd be worth something." "Oh wait, you can't. You're just nothing." She laughed, the sound sharp and mean, the kind that made Daichi's fists clench. Rigo didn't even flinch at the words. His face was pale, eyes fixed on the floor. It was obvious he'd heard it all before, so many times that the insults had stopped hurting and just left him empty, a shell hollowed out by repetition. Daichi felt something ignite inside him, hot and furious, a fire that demanded to be heard. "Hey!" he yelled, voice ringing in the tiled room. All 4 heads snapped up. The older kids looked annoyed, more inconvenienced than surprised. Rigo's eyes went wide, fear and hope flickering across his face. Daichi strode forward, planting himself between Rigo and the bullies, his posture defiant. His hands were trembling, but not out of fear. He was burning with anger. "Back off," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. The spiky-haired boy pet an eyebrow, a sneer twisting his lips. "You serious? You're defending this quirkless loser?" Daichi didn't flinch. "Yeah," he shot back, "I am." The girl's sparks danced higher, blue-white and menacing. "You know what you're doing? He doesn't belong here. Back off before you end up like him." Daichi squared his shoulders, raising his chin. "I don't care. I don't stand by for bullies. So back off." The words rang out, louder than he'd intended, but he didn't care. He meant everyone. Behind him, Rigo's voice trembled, soft but desperate. "Daichi, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Daichi replied, not looking back. His focus was absolute, the world narrowing down to the space between him and the bullies. The silent 3rd kid, muscles bulging as his quirk activated, cracked his knuckles. "Big mistake, kid." The spiky-haired boy's hands glowed brighter, the girl's fingers sparking more violently. The bathroom suddenly felt charged, the air heavy with the threat of violence, as if a storm were about to break right there among the sinks and cracked tiles. Daichi was scared, his heart was pounding, his skin prickling with adrenaline, but he refused to show it. He stood his ground, refusing to give an inch. For a moment, it felt like everything might explode. Then, suddenly, the shriek of the bell tore through the tension, loud and jarring, a reminder that the world outside was still moving, that time hadn't stopped. The bullies hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The glow faded from the boys' hands, the sparks dying on the girls' fingertips. They exchanged glances, weighing their options. Lucky break, the spiky-haired one spat, jabbing a finger at Daichi. You just screwed up. You're in it now. Hope he's worth it. There was a threat in his tone, a promise that this wasn't over. They shoved past, bumping Daichi hard enough to nearly knock him over, and disappeared out the door, their footsteps fading down the hallway. The bathroom was quiet again, the heavy silence broken only by the steady drip of a leaky faucet drip, 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 a mundane soundtrack to the chaos that had just passed. And in that silence, Daichi realized something. Even if the world was cruel, even if the odds were stacked against them, they could still choose to stand up together. Even if it meant shaking, even if it meant risking everything. Because sometimes, that's all it took to change everything. Daichi crouched down beside Rigo, who was still slumped against the bathroom wall, one hand pressed against his ribs where the bully's kick had landed. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and his eyes were fixed on the grimy tile floor as if he could disappear into the cracks if he stared hard enough. Hey, Daichi said softly, extending a hand. You okay? Rigo didn't answer right away. His fingers trembled as he pushed himself up slightly, wincing. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Daichi's voice was firm, no hesitation. You're my friend. Friends don't let friends get beat up in bathrooms. Rigo finally looked up, his dark eyes glistening with something between gratitude and disbelief. They're going to come after you now. You know that, right? Daichi shrugged, offering a lopsided grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Let them. I'm not scared of those Jers. It was a lie. His hands were still shaking, but he said it anyway because Rigo needed to hear it. Why? Rigo's voice cracked. Why would you risk that for me? I'm nobody. I'm quirkless. You're my first real friend, Daichi interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. And that means something. That means everything. He held out his hand again, more insistently this time. Come on. Let's get you cleaned up. Rigo stared at the offered hand for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then slowly he reached out and took it. Daichi pulled him to his feet, steadying him when he wobbled slightly. Has this been happening a lot? Daichi asked, his voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. Rigo's silence was answer enough. For how long? A while. Rigo turned toward the sink, avoiding Daichi's gaze. He turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on his face, watching the pink-tinged water swirl down the drain. Since I got here, pretty much. Daichi felt something hot and sharp twist in his chest. Do the teachers know? Yeah. Rigo's laugh was bitter, hollow. They know. Just don't care. I'm quirkless, so. He shrugged, the gesture heavy with resignation. I guess I don't matter as much. That's bullshit. The word came out harsher than Daichi intended, and Rigo flinched slightly. Daichi softened his tone. Sorry. That's not right. You should tell your cousins. They'd do something about it. No. Rigo's response was immediate, almost panicked. He turned off the faucet and gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles going white. I can't tell them. Why not? Because. Rigo's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because this is the only school in the area. If they find out, they'll want to move or homeschool me or something. And He turned to face Daichi, his eyes pleading. I just made my first friend. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to leave. The words hit Daichi like a physical blow. He'd never thought about it that way, that Rigo had been so alone for so long that even enduring daily torments seemed worth it if it meant keeping one friend. The weight of that realization settled over him, heavy and humbling. Okay, Daichi said finally, his voice steady. I get it. But. He stepped closer, meeting Rigo's eyes with an intensity that surprised even himself. I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I got your back. No matter what those JRKs do, no matter what happens, I'm sticking with you. We're in this together now. Rigo's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. Instead, he nodded, a small, shaky movement that spoke volumes. Together, he echoed, the word fragile but hopeful. Together, Daichi. Confirmed. He clapped Rigo on the shoulder, gentler this time, mindful of the bruises forming beneath his shirt. Now come on. We missed lunch, and I'm starving. Think we can survive the rest of the day on empty stomachs? Rigo managed a weak smile, the first genuine one Daichi had seen since entering the bathroom. Guess we'll find out. If I pass out in math class, you're carrying me to the nurse's office, Daichi joked, already heading toward the door. With what strength? Rigo shot back, a hint of his usual dry humor creeping back into his voice. I just got kicked in the ribs. Details. Daichi held the door open, waiting for Rigo to pass through first. We'll figure it out. That's what friends do, right? Right. Rigo stepped into the hallway, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his shoulders didn't look quite so hunched, his steps not quite so heavy. They walked back toward their classroom together, side by side, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. The threat of the bullies still loomed, an unspoken promise of future confrontations, but somehow it felt less suffocating now. Less insurmountable. Because Rigo wasn't alone anymore. And neither was Daichi. And in that silence, Daichi realized something. Even if the world was cruel, even if the odds were stacked against them, they could still choose to stand up together. Even if it meant shaking, even if it meant risking everything. Because sometimes, that's all it took to change everything. The weekend arrives with a hush, a gentle easing of the world's grip, as if the whole town has finally exhaled after a week of holding its breath. School fades into the background, no teachers peering over glasses, no whispered rumors flitting between lockers, no sharp glances slicing through tense hallways. What's left is a Saturday sky so vast and blue it feels like anything could be waiting just above the rooftops, an open invitation to step outside and breathe. Daichi's arrival is heralded by the cheerful rattle of his family's tiny car, the engine chugging along valiantly as if determined not to let anyone down. He bursts out the door with a wave so enthusiastic it borders on comical, as though he's finally stumbled upon someone who makes waving worth the effort. At the gate, Rigo stands with Reiko, his hands fidgeting behind his back, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he's trying to shake off invisible worries. There's a nervous energy radiating from him, a barely contained hope that today might be different. Trailing Daichi are his parents. Aya Morita's eyes are alive with warmth, the kind of gaze that could thaw frozen mornings and coax even the shyest child into a smile. Her husband, Ichiro, has a sturdy presence, broad-shouldered and calm, his hands marked by the quiet confidence of someone who has spent a lifetime putting things back together, whether they be sputtering gadgets or the fragile pieces of a tough day. Reiko, ever the courteous host, bows smoothly. Welcome. Come on in. I'm Reiko Tadashima, Rigo's cousin. Her smile is bright and practiced, but there's genuine kindness underneath. Ayam's face lights up in return. Thank you for having us. Daichi hasn't stopped chattering about Rigo all week. We wanted to meet the boy who's had him grinning again. He hasn't done that in a long time. The compliment catches Rigo off guard. He straightens, eyes widening just a fraction, as if trying to process the idea that his presence could be the cause of someone else's happiness. Ichiro offers a respectful nod. Good to finally meet you, Rigo. Rigo ducks his head and mumbles, hi, sneaking a glance at Daichi. Daichi beams back, utterly unbothered, as if this moment is exactly how life should be: friends, families, possibilities. Inside, the adults slip off their shoes and fall into easy conversation. The Tadashima home is a patchwork of warmth and clutter, every surface bearing the mark of time spent and memories made, photo frames slightly askew, scatterings of books, and the faintest aroma of last night's dinner. Rigo, emboldened by Daichi's presence, blurts out, Daichi, wanna see my room? Daichi's answer is immediate, his grin infectious. Yeah, totally. Reiko, equal parts chaperone and big sister, falls in step behind them. She's got that watchful look, halfway between guardian and accomplice, making sure Rigo doesn't retreat into himself halfway down the hall. When Rigo opens his door, the room is its own world. Books rise in precarious towers, some threatening to topple. Diagrams and charts are taped to the walls, evidence of questions asked and answers chased down late into the night. From the ceiling dangles a solar system made of wire and painted foam, the planets spinning lazily, as if the laws of gravity are just suggestions here. Daichi steps inside, his eyes wide with awe. It's as if he's wandered into a private museum, curated by a quiet genius who never expected visitors. "Oh, all this is yours." Rigo shrugs, eyes fixed on the floor. "Yeah, I just like learning about stuff. The way things work. Why the world is the way it is." Daichi looks around again, his admiration unfiltered. "You're smart. I wish I understood half this stuff." Reiko laughs, nudging Rigo. "He can teach you if you're brave enough." Daichi nods so hard his hair flops into his eyes, and Rigo's cheeks flush with a shy, unexpected pride. It's a rare thing, to be seen not as a curiosity but as someone worth knowing. In minutes, the boys are absorbed in their own orbit. Rigo demonstrates a simple magnet experiment, the pieces fitting together with the precision of old habits. Daichi, for his part, unpacks a couple of battered action figures from his backpack, just in case, and soon they're swapping stories about favorite heroes and wild what-ifs. There's a comfort in the shared enthusiasm, a language that doesn't require translation. Meanwhile, in the living room, the adults gather around the low table. The kettle whistles, filling the air with the scent of green tea. Conversation drifts in gentle waves, polite and inquisitive. Ayam, ever perceptive, glances down the hallway, her voice soft but intent. "If you don't mind me asking, how long has Rigo been with you?" Reiko's mother, Hana Tadashima, folds her hands in her lap. A shadow passes over her features, the kind that comes from carrying stories too heavy for words. 3 years now," she replies, her voice steady but tinged with old pain. Ichiro's brow creases with concern. "Is everything all right?" Reiko's father, Misato, stares into his tea, searching for the right words. "You remember that news story? The pro-hero whose wife was killed?" His voice falters, the memory raw. Ayam's hand flies to her mouth. Recognition dawns, horror following fast behind. "You're not saying?" Misato nods, his expression grim. "Rigo is their son." The Moritas go pale. It's as if the story has leapt from the television and landed in the middle of their afternoon, real and unmanageable. Ayam whispers, her voice trembling, "I remember. That monster. How could a hero do that to his own family?" Hana answers, her words heavy with exhaustion. "We ask ourselves that every day." Misato's hands tremble around his teacup. Rigo saw it all. His father hit him. Killed his mother right in front of him. The worst part is, after it happened, people still defended that man. All because he was a hero. They wouldn't believe he could do something like that. Ichiro's jaw tightens, his eyes hardening. There's no forgiving that. No excuse, not for any reason. Ayam wipes away a tear that escapes despite her efforts. No child should have to survive something like that, let alone carry the weight of it every day. Hana's voice softens, barely above a whisper. And then, Rigo was diagnosed quirkless. As if he hadn't been through enough. The bullying at school only got worse. Kids can be so cruel, and sometimes the adults aren't any better. He barely talks about school anymore, he just shuts down. Ayam looks thoughtfully down the hallway where the boys disappeared, her gaze gentle and sad. Our Daichi knows what it's like to be on the outside. His quirk isn't strong, barely noticeable, really. People overlook him, call him useless, like he doesn't matter. But Rigo, there's a kindness in him. A softness you don't see much anymore. Ichiro nods, his voice certain. And he's bright. The kind of smart that lifts the people around him up. I think Daichi could learn a lot from him. The Tadashimas share a quiet, grateful look, relief flickering in their eyes. It's a rare thing to find understanding, and rarer still to be offered help without judgment. Ayam lifts her teacup, her tone earnest. We just want you to know Rigo is always welcome with us. Quirk or no quirk, it doesn't matter. If he ever needs anything, or just a place to escape, please tell him he can come to us. Promise. Ichiro adds, his voice steady, and if Daichi can be a friend to him, someone who actually listens, then I'm grateful. Every kid deserves a friend who sees them for who they are. The adults bow their heads in mutual understanding, the gesture heavy with respect and hope. From the hallway, laughter drifts in bright, unsteady, and unmistakably Rigo's, as if he stumbled into joy after a long absence. For a moment, the weight in the room lightens. Ayam smiles, her eyes shining. That's a sound worth everything. Misato's expression softens, hope flickering across his face. Maybe they can help each other heal. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Back in Rigo's room, the world is small and safe. Daichi sits cross-legged on the floor, eyes glued to the miniature science kit Rigo is setting up. There's a hush between them, not awkward but comfortable, like the silence that settles between friends who don't need to fill every gap with words. Daichi grins, irrepressible. You know you're really cool, right? Like, actually cool. Rigo goes pink, ducking his head. I'm not. I just like this stuff. Daichi shrugs, utterly sincere. You are. And I'm not taking it back. Rigo stares at him, blinking slowly, as if he's just surfaced from a long, weightless dream. For a moment, his face is unreadable, a blank canvas waiting for the first brushstroke. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts behind his eyes. It's a flicker, fragile but unmistakable, hope, or maybe something even more luminous, a dawning warmth he hasn't let himself feel in a long time. It's like witnessing the miracle of a tiny green sprout piercing through the charred remains of a once devastated field, a single breath of life daring to exist where there was nothing but ash. In the doorway, Reiko stands silently, her hand pressed tight against her chest as if to steady her racing heart. Her eyes brim with a mix of awe and relief, watching the scene unfold, a quiet witness to a moment that feels suspended between past heartache and possibility. Two boys, each carrying the weight of their own silent storms, lost for so long in the wide, lonely expanses of their separate skies. For years, they've orbited each other at a distance, each certain that no one else could understand the shape of their solitude. But now, as if drawn together by some unseen force, they find themselves sharing the same space, the same breath, pulled together by an invisible gravity that neither can resist. And in that small room, where the air seems to vibrate with anticipation, the universe itself feels transformed. The old, familiar coldness recedes, replaced by the fragile but growing warmth of connection. For the first time in what feels like forever, the vastness between them shrinks, and the world seems just a little less lonely, a little less dark. 2 weeks later, the Morita household was quiet in the way only late-night silence could be, thick and warm, punctuated by the distant chirp of crickets and the occasional creak of settling wood. In Daichi's room, 2 sleeping bags lay side by side on the floor, surrounded by scattered comics and the faint glow of a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. Daichi had insisted on the floor. It's more fun this way, he'd said, grinning as he unrolled the sleeping bags. Like camping but with better snacks and no bugs. Rigo had smiled at that, a small, tentative thing, but genuine. It was his first sleepover at Daichi's house, his first sleepover anywhere since. Well, since before. Now, hours later, Daichi was sprawled on his back, one arm flung over his face, snoring softly. Beside him, Rigo lay curled on his side, his breathing shallow and uneven even in sleep. His fingers clutched the edge of the sleeping bag, knuckles white, as if holding on to something that might slip away. In his dreams, the world was dark and red. You're worthless. A disgrace to this family. His father's voice, a roar that shook the walls, that made the air itself feel heavy and suffocating. Rigo tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was small again, so small, and the hallway stretched endlessly before him. "Gariki, please." The mother's voice, desperate and breaking. He turned, and there she was, her face pale and streaked with tears, her hands raised as if she could ward off the inevitable. "Mama!" He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His father's hand, massive, glowing with that terrible atomic energy, reached out, and then, blood. So much blood. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, staring at nothing. This is your fault. All of it. You ruined everything. The words wrapped around him like chains, dragging him down into the darkness where he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. No. Mama. Mama. Rigo's scream tore through the quiet room, raw and agonized. His body thrashed in the sleeping bag, limbs flailing as if trying to fight off invisible hands. Tears streamed down his face, his chest heaving with panicked, gasping breaths. Daichi jolted awake, his heart hammering. Rigo! He scrambled upright, eyes wide with fear. Rigo, wake up. But Rigo was still trapped in the nightmare, his screams dissolving into broken sobs, words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent rush. Please don't. I'm sorry, Mama, please. Rigo! Daichi grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. Wake up. It's me. It's Daichi. You're safe. Rigo's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't seem to see Daichi at all, only the ghosts that haunted him. He jerked back, scrambling away until his back hit the wall, his breathing ragged and desperate. Hey, it's okay, Daichi said, his voice shaking but trying to stay calm. It's just me. You're at my house, remember? You're safe. Before Rigo could respond, the door burst open. Ayam rushed in, her hair disheveled, concern etched across her face. Ichiro was right behind her, his hand already reaching for the light switch. What happened? Ayam asked, her eyes immediately finding Rigo huddled against the wall, trembling and pale. Oh, sweetheart. She crossed the room in an instant, kneeling beside him. Rigo, can you hear me? You're safe. You're here with us. You're safe. Rigo's gaze finally focused on her face, and something in him seemed to break. A choked sob escaped his throat, and he buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking with the force of his tears. Ayam didn't hesitate. She pulled him into her arms, holding him close, one hand stroking his hair. It's okay. Let it out. You're okay. Ichiro placed a gentle hand on Daichi's shoulder, guiding him back slightly to give Rigo space. Daichi looked up at his father, his face pale and frightened. Dad, why was he screaming like that? What's wrong with him? Ichiro and Ayam exchanged a long, heavy look. Ayam continued to hold Rigo, who was still crying silently, into her shoulder, his fingers clutching her sleeve like a lifeline. Daichi, Ichiro said quietly, crouching down to his son's level. There's something we need to tell you. Something about Rigo. What? Daichi's voice was small, uncertain. Is he sick? No, not sick. Ichiro's expression was grave, his usual easy smile nowhere to be found. But he's been through something terrible. Something no child should ever have to experience. Ayam shifted slightly, still holding Rigo but turning so she could see Daichi. Sweetheart, Rigo's parents. His mother and father. They're not around anymore. I know, Daichi said, confused. He lives with his cousins. But his mother died 3 years ago, Ichiro continued, his voice gentle but firm. She was killed. By his father. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Daichi's eyes went wide, his mouth falling open. What? Rigo's father was a pro-hero. Ichiro explained, each word careful and measured. His hero name was Atomos. His real name was Gariki Shizurashi. He was a powerful man. But he was also cruel. Especially to Rigo. Why? Daichi's voice cracked. What did Rigo do? Nothing. Ayam's voice was thick with emotion. Rigo didn't do anything wrong. His father blamed him for being quirkless. He thought Rigo was a failure, a disgrace. And he took that anger out on him. On both of them, Rigo and his mother. Daichi felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. But he's a hero. Heroes don't. Not all heroes are good people, son, Ichiro said quietly. Some of them just have power. And Gariki Shizurashi used his power to hurt the people who should have been able to trust him most. 3 years ago, Ayam continued, her voice barely above a whisper, Gariki came home in a rage. Rigo's mother tried to protect him. And Gariki. She paused, glancing down at Rigo, who had gone very still in her arms. He killed her. Right in front of Rigo. And then he tried to kill Rigo too. No. The word came out as a breath, a denial of something too horrible to be real. Daichi looked at Rigo, really looked at him, and saw the way his friend was trembling, the way his eyes were squeezed shut as if he could block out the memories being spoken aloud. Rigo survived, Ichiro said. The police arrived in time. But he saw everything. He watched his mother die. He felt his father's hands around his throat. He was 8 years old. Daichi felt tears prickling at his own eyes. All those times he'd complained about his parents being embarrassing, about his quirk being annoying, about stupid, trivial things, and Rigo had been carrying this unbearable weight. He's been living with his cousins ever since, I.M. added. The Tadashimas. They've been wonderful to him. But the nightmares, they still come. Especially when he's somewhere new, somewhere that doesn't feel entirely safe yet. Daichi's throat felt tight. He looked at Rigo, who was still pressed against I.M., his face hidden, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself as small as possible. Rigo, Daichi said, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Rigo didn't respond, didn't move. Daichi crawled closer, ignoring his father's cautioning hand. He sat down right next to Rigo, close enough that their shoulders touched. You're the bravest person I know, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I mean it. You went through all that, and you're still here. You're still trying. You're still. You. Rigo's breath hitched. I'm sorry I didn't know, Daichi continued, his own tears spilling over now. I'm sorry I asked about your parents that day. I'm sorry I didn't understand why you flinched when I mentioned my dad. I get it now. And He swallowed hard. I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again. I'll protect you. I swear. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, Rigo lifted his head from I.M.'s shoulder. His face was blotchy and tear-streaked, his eyes red and swollen. He looked at Daichi, and something in his expression cracked open, something raw and vulnerable and desperately hopeful. You don't think I'm broken? Rigo's voice was so small, so fragile. What? No. Daichi's response was immediate and fierce. You're not broken. You're strong. You survived. You're still here. That's not broken. That's amazing. I.M.'s eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. Ichiro squeezed her shoulder gently, his own expression tight with emotion. Rigo stared at Daichi for another moment, then, almost hesitantly, he leaned into him. Daichi wrapped his arms around his friend, holding him tightly, and Rigo buried his face in Daichi's shoulder and cried, really cried, the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and wounded and finally allowed to surface. They stayed like that for a long time, I.M. and Ichiro watching over them both, the nightlight casting soft shadows on the walls. Eventually, I.M. spoke, her voice gentle. Rigo, sweetheart, would you like to sleep in our room tonight? Or we can stay up with you boys for a while, if you'd prefer. Rigo pulled back slightly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. He glanced at Daichi, then back at I.M. Can I stay here? With Daichi? Of course, I.M. said immediately. Whatever makes you feel safe. I'll stay awake, Daichi announced, his tone brooking no argument. I'll make sure you're okay. Daichi, you need sleep too, Ichiro started, but Daichi shook his head. I'll be fine. Rigo needs me. Ichiro and I.M. exchanged another look, this one softer, tinged with pride. All right, Ichiro said finally. But if either of you need anything, we're right down the hall. Okay. Okay, both boys said in unison. I.M. leaned down and pressed a kiss to Rigo's forehead, then Daichi's. You're both very brave, she whispered. We're proud of you. She and Ichiro left the room quietly, pulling the door almost closed but leaving it cracked open, just in case. In the dim glow of the rocket ship nightlight, Daichi and Rigo settled back into their sleeping bags. Rigo lay on his side, facing Daichi, his eyes still red but calmer now. Daichi propped himself up on one elbow, watching his friend with a protective intensity that belied his age. "You don't have to stay awake," Rigo murmured. "I'll be okay." "I know," Daichi said. "But I want to. Just in case." Rigo's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "Thank you. Anytime." They lay there in the quiet, the weight of the night settling around them like a blanket. Rigo's breathing gradually evened out, his body relaxing as exhaustion finally claimed him. Daichi stayed awake, true to his word, his eyes never leaving his friend's face. And in that small, cluttered room filled with comics and half-finished experiments, something shifted. A bond that had been forming over shared lunches and whispered conversations solidified into something unbreakable. Because Daichi had seen the worst of Rigo's pain, and he hadn't turned away. And Rigo, for the first time in 3 years, felt like maybe just maybe he wasn't alone anymore. End of chapter. 4 years drifted past, each one quieter than the last, and the silence never felt gentle or kind. It pressed in around you, muted everything, until the quiet itself became a weight, sinking deep into your bones. It lingered there, unnoticed except in the moments you tried to shrug it off, only to realize how thoroughly it had settled into you, as if it was waiting for you to notice its grip. Rigo Shizurashi started junior high at 12, a bundle of nerves and sharp corners, nothing about him soft or easy. His eyes missed nothing, always scanning, restless, as if searching for a way out or a place to hide. He'd long ago learned to conceal the bruises that used to color his skin. Now, whatever hurt he carried was buried deep, hidden beneath a practiced calm. Those old wounds had learned the same lessons Rigo did: stay quiet, especially when adults were paying attention, because attention was rarely safe. Daichi Morita showed up at his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. There was a casual confidence to Daichi, a looseness in his stride that suggested he belonged anywhere he chose to walk. Together, they made an unlikely pair, Daichi radiating ease, Rigo wrapped tight in his own caution, but over the years they'd figured out how to move in step, as if the sidewalk had always belonged to both of them. Time changed them in different ways. Daichi grew bigger, his presence somehow filling up every room, his laughter bouncing off the walls and drawing people in. He didn't seem to notice the space he took up. It was effortless, as if the world simply expanded to accommodate him. Rigo, on the other hand, became sharper, quicker. His thoughts zipped around inside his mind, collecting in tangled heaps, threatening to spill out if he let his guard down for even a second. There was a constant tension in him, like he was always teetering on the edge of losing control. And yet, somehow, he always managed to hold himself together, stacking his worries and memories just so, keeping them from crashing down. It was a fragile balance, but it was his, and for now it held. The cafeteria the following Monday is a cacophony of voices, trays clattering, laughter echoing off the industrial beige walls. Rigo and Daichi sit at their usual spot, a table tucked into the corner, away from the main flow of traffic, where the noise feels just a fraction more manageable. Daichi is mid-story, gesticulating wildly with a half-eaten sandwich, something about his failed attempt to build a hoverboard using a skateboard and a desk fan. His enthusiasm is infectious, his words tumbling over each other in their eagerness to be heard. Rigo listens, nodding along, his shoulders loose in a way they weren't just a week ago. There's a faint smile tugging at his lips, something that still feels new and uncertain, like a muscle he's forgotten how to use. Then, from across the cafeteria, a voice cuts through the din sharp. Commanding. Familiar in the worst possible way. You think you're better than everyone else? You think just because you've got a flashy quirk, you can get away with anything? Rigo's entire body goes rigid. The sandwich in his hand drops to the tray with a soft thud. His eyes snap toward the source of the sound, a teacher, tall and broad-shouldered, his face twisted in anger as he looms over a trembling first-year student. The teacher's hand is raised, not striking yet, but hovering. The threat. A promise. Rigo's vision tunnels. The cafeteria blurs at the edges, the noise fading into a dull roar, then nothing. All he can see is that hand, suspended in the air. All he can hear is that voice, not the teacher's voice anymore, but his father's. You think crying is going to change anything? You think you matter? He's 5 years old again, frozen in place, watching his mother step between him and his father's raised fist. Her voice is pleading, desperate. Please, not him. He's just a child. But his father doesn't listen. His father never listens. Rigo's breath comes in short, ragged gasps. His hands are shaking, curling into fists so tight his nails dig crescents into his palms. The room spins, the walls pressing in, and he can't breathe, can't think, can't. Rigo. Daichi's voice is soft, cutting through the haze like a lifeline thrown into dark water. Rigo blinks, but the images won't leave. They overlap the cafeteria, the kitchen, the teacher, his father, all bleeding together until he can't tell what's real anymore. Hey Rigo. Look at me. Daichi's hand hovers near Rigo's shoulder, not touching yet, waiting for permission. His eyes are wide with concern, but there's no pity there, no judgment, just a steady, quiet presence that says, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Rigo forces himself to focus on Daichi's face. The sharp edges of memory begin to soften, just a fraction. He can still hear his father's voice echoing in the back of his mind, still feel the phantom grip of fingers that once bruised his arm, but Daichi is here, solid and real, anchoring him to the present. It's okay, Daichi says, his voice low and even. You're safe. That guy's not your dad. You're here with me. You're safe. Rigo swallows hard, his throat tight. He nods, once, twice, trying to convince himself as much as Daichi. The trembling in his hands begins to ease, though his chest still feels like it's caught in a vice. Daichi glances toward the teacher, who's still berating the student, oblivious to the damage his words are causing. Daichi's jaw tightens, a flash of anger crossing his face, but he doesn't move. Instead, he shifts closer to Rigo, deliberately blocking his view of the scene. You want to get out of here? Daichi asks. We can go to the library. It's quiet there. Nobody yells. Rigo manages another nod, and Daichi immediately stands, grabbing both their trays without a word. He doesn't rush, doesn't make a scene. He just waits, patient and undemanding, until Rigo finds the strength to stand on shaky legs. They leave together, Daichi walking close enough that their shoulders almost touch, a silent promise that Rigo doesn't have to face this alone. As they step into the hallway, the noise of the cafeteria fades behind them, replaced by the muffled quiet of empty corridors. Rigo's breathing slowly evens out. The vice around his chest loosens just enough. He doesn't say anything, can't, not yet, but Daichi doesn't seem to need words. He just stays close, a steady, unshakable presence. In the library, they sit at a table tucked behind the stacks, where the light is softer and the world feels smaller, more manageable. Daichi pulls out his phone and starts scrolling through memes, occasionally showing one to Rigo without expectation of laughter, just offering distraction. Minutes pass. The silence between them isn't heavy, it's the kind that holds space without demanding anything in return. Finally, Rigo speaks, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked like him. For a second I thought. He stops, unable to finish. Daichi doesn't ask who. He already knows. That must have been scary. Rigo nods, staring at the table. It happens sometimes. I see something, or hear something, and suddenly I'm back there. Like it never ended. Daichi sets his phone down, his expression serious but soft. It did end. You got away. You're here. And that guy, whoever he was, he can't hurt you. Not anymore. Rigo wants to believe him. Part of him does. But the other part, the part that still flinches at raised voices and sudden movements, isn't so sure. Daichi must sense the doubt because he leans forward, his voice firm but kind. And even if it feels like it's happening again, you're not alone this time. I'm right here. Always. Rigo looks up, meeting Daichi's eyes. There's no lie there, no exaggeration. Just a simple, unbreakable truth. For the first time since the flashback began, Rigo feels the knot in his chest begin to unravel. It doesn't disappear entirely, it never does, but it loosens enough that he can breathe again. Thanks, he whispers. Daichi grins, easy and warm. Any to the dude. That's what certified homies are for. And despite everything, Rigo almost smiles. The bell chimed through the library soft, barely a suggestion of sound, but it was enough to make Rigo's shoulders jig, his pen stuttering across the page. He hated how jumpy he was, how his nerves seemed to live just under his skin, always ready to spark. Daichi noticed right away. He always did. "Hey," he said, voice low and careful, "we don't have to rush. We've got time." There was a steadiness to Daichi's words, the kind that made Rigo's panic slow, even if just a little. Rigo exhaled, slow, letting his breath out like he was letting out the tension. "It's fine," he managed, trying to sound like he meant it. Better now." The words hovered between honesty and wishful thinking. The memories, the ones that always seemed to flicker at the edges of his vision, had retreated, coiling back into those dim corners where they usually lived. They never truly vanished, but he'd learned how to distract himself, to keep his mind busy enough that the past loosened its grip. They started packing up, the ritual of organizing books and notebooks grounding him. As he zipped his bag, Rigo felt the familiar itch behind his eyes, the restless energy that meant his mind was already racing ahead, sorting facts, connecting patterns, solving puzzles no one else could see. Numbers and systems clicked into place in his head, his little world of logic and order, and for a moment, everything made sense. Focus was his superpower. It was something he could always control, even when everything else felt impossible. They stepped out into the hallway, sunlight slicing through the high windows, dust motes swirling in the rays. The corridor was a river of students' voices bouncing against tile. Backpacks thumping, laughter ricocheting off lockers. Rigo kept to the edge, shoulder brushing the cool metal, gaze fixed on the floor. But his steps felt more certain now, like the ground was finally solid under his feet. Daichi walked beside him, flicking a glance Rigo's way. "You good?" Rigo almost said yes automatically, but stopped. He let himself check in with his own body, the way the air felt in his lungs, the way his hands weren't shaking anymore. "Yeah," he said, softer this time. "I just want to show you something." Daichi's curiosity lit up his face instantly, his whole posture shifting forward. "Show me what?" Rigo glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was watching, then nodded for Daichi to follow. He led them toward the science wing, where the noise faded and the air held that strange blend of cleaning chemicals and old paper. The hallways here always felt quieter, like the world outside didn't quite reach this far. Rigo paused outside a door marked by a faded, peeling warning sticker. No teachers in sight, just the hum of the building settling. He reached into his bag and pulled out a device, a tangle of wires, mismatched parts, a Frankenstein's monster of scavenged tech, but each piece fit together with careful intention. Daichi squinted, a grin already tugging at his mouth. "Is that a lockpick?" Rigo shrugged, mouth twisting in a half-smile. "Something like that." He pressed a button, and the lock gave a soft, satisfying click. With a gentle push, the door eased open, whispering into the quiet. Inside, darkness waited. Rigo flicked on the lights, and the room came to life. It was a world apart from the rest of the school. Scrap metal heaped in corners, shelves crammed with half-dismantled machines, circuit boards stacked like postcards, old batteries in neat rows. Diagrams and notes papered the walls, some hand-scrawled, others printed and annotated in bold marker. The whole space buzzed with the low, contented hum of hidden electronics, like the room itself was breathing. Daichi stood in the doorway, stunned. "Dude, what is this place?" Rigo felt suddenly vulnerable, his hands tugging at his sleeves. "Started last year," he said, almost apologetic. "Stuff people throw out, I fix what I can, and if I can't fix it, I turn it into something new." He looked around, pride and embarrassment mixing in his chest. It just built up. Daichi turned slowly, taking it all in, his eyes wide as moons. "You did all of this? Alone?" Rigo nodded, then hesitated. "Mostly." Daichi raised an eyebrow. "Mostly?" Rigo couldn't help but smile. "You helped me steal the power strip last year." "That was for my phone." Daichi protested, but he was grinning now, his voice warm and teasing. "Still counts." Daichi laughed, the sound echoing off metal and wires. He stepped closer to a wall papered with Rigo's notes. His gaze landed on a sheet covered in equations and molecular diagrams. Wait, is this chemical bonding theory? That's, like, way past our grade. Rigo's ears went pink. The textbook got boring. Daichi gaped. You got bored with the textbook? Rigo, we're 12. Rigo shrugged, a little defiant. Doesn't matter how old you are. Molecules don't care how old you are. The rules are the same. Daichi looked at him, then really looked, and for a second, Rigo wondered if he'd finally crossed some invisible line. But Daichi just grinned, eyes bright. You're nuts, you know that? Thanks, Rigo replied, and for once, the word felt like a compliment. They lingered in the room, talking science and superheroes, their voices weaving through stories and secrets that didn't belong anywhere else. In that space, surrounded by the evidence of Rigo's restless mind, they could be themselves, strange, brilliant, and unafraid. When they finally headed back to class, the world felt a little less sharp around the edges. Their secret workshop was proof that something good could hide away, quietly growing in the dark and still matter. It was a reminder that even the pieces everyone else discarded could be built into something extraordinary, as long as someone cared enough to see their worth. And in that hidden room, with sunlight filtering through dusty windows and the hum of possibility in the air, Rigo let himself believe that he and all his strange ideas might matter, too. 2 days later, everything flipped. The air in homeroom felt different that morning, thicker, somehow, as if everyone was waiting for a thunderclap. The homeroom teacher cleared her throat, and instantly every student sat up straighter, antennae raised for drama. You could feel it. Something big was about to land. We have a transfer student joining us today, the teacher announced, her voice a little brighter than usual. Let's all be welcoming, all right? As if on cue, the door slid open with an audible snap. She walked in without a hint of hesitation, chin up, steps measured and confident, as if the classroom was her stage and we were lucky to be her audience. Akiha Kurosawa. Her name echoed through the room like a dropped pin. Black hair pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. Her eyes flicked around the room, not cold, but sharply observant, like she was cataloging everything and everyone at once. She looked at ease, even bored, but under the calm was a kind of tension, a quiet charge that made you feel that if you looked away she might suddenly ignite, all flame and motion. The boys? They were hopeless. Jaws dropped, whispers buzzing like static. Oh, did you see her? Is she a model or something? I swear I've seen her in a magazine. She's way too cool for this class. I bet she's got a quirk that's off the charts. Rigo was barely aware of the commotion at first. He was half listening, doodling in the margin of his notebook, mind elsewhere. But then, out of nowhere, she looked right at him. Just a quick glance, not even a full second, but it felt like the world pressed pause. He could feel the heat rise to his cheeks, his heart launching into overdrive, and he looked away with embarrassing speed. Did she blush too? Or was that wishful thinking? Daichi, his best friend, saw the whole thing. Oh, he murmured, a grin spreading across his face as he leaned in close. Now this is gonna be fun. The morning crawled by, but lunchtime arrived almost before Rigo realized. He and Daichi headed to their usual spot by the window, trays in hand, half talking about chemistry homework and half arguing about the finer points of atomic bonds. I'm telling you, nitrogen bonding is a scam, Daichi insisted, stabbing his food for emphasis. Rigo rolled his eyes. You just don't get it. It's not a scam, it's literally how molecules work. I get it, Daichi grumbled. I just don't trust stuff I can't see. Like, who decided invisible things should run the whole show? That's called science, Rigo shot back, grinning. Daichi snorted. And that's called faith. Elsewhere in the cafeteria, the new girl was making her rounds, or rather, letting the rounds come to her. Boys lined up, trying their luck, tripping over their words, each convinced he was the one who'd crack her cool. Want to sit with us? One asked, voice hopeful. Take my seat. Seriously, I don't need to eat, another offered, overly eager. Hey, do you like heroes? I collect hero cards. No, Akiha cut him off, her tone polite but final. No, thanks, she told another. Not interested, she said to a third, with a smile that was almost apologetic. She deflected every attempt, calm and unflappable, as if she'd rehearsed this routine 100 times in 100 different schools. There was no malice, just boundaries, a quiet, unwavering confidence that made her seem untouchable. But then, as if drawn by a magnet, her gaze found Rigo again. This time, she didn't look away. Instead, she walked straight over, her footsteps measured but unhesitating. The entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. Conversation dipped to a hush, and all eyes tracked her progress. She stopped at their table, her tray balanced in one hand. She said, voice clear but a little uncertain, "Do you mind if I sit here?" Daichi looked like he'd been hit by lightning. Rigo nearly choked on his drink, fumbling for composure. "Oh, yeah, sure." Daichi managed, scooting over so quickly he almost knocked over his chair. Akiha sat down, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "I'm Akiha Kurosawa." "Rigo," he replied, trying not to sound as nervous as he felt. "And this is Daichi." "Nice to meet you," Daichi said, recovering fast. "So, what's your quirk? Or is that a secret?" Akiha considered him for a moment, then tilted her head. "Fire manipulation. Close combat." Daichi's eyes went wide as dinner plates. "Explosions? Pyrotechnics?" "More like control," she answered, flexing her fingers as if testing invisible strings. For a split second, the air around her shimmered, and a gentle warmth radiated from her hands, subtle but unmistakable. Rigo stared, captivated. There was something mesmerizing about the way she handled herself, confident but not arrogant, powerful but restrained. He found himself wanting to know more, to ask questions, to find out what else she could do, what she was thinking, what had brought her here. For the first time in a long while, school suddenly felt unpredictable. And kind of exciting. Akiha turned to Daichi, her eyes shining with genuine curiosity rather than any hint of judgment, as if she was truly interested in his answer and nothing more. "So, what about you?" she asked, her tone inviting. "What's your quirk?" Daichi hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck in that familiar way that said he never quite knew what to say when it came to himself. "Chameleon," he replied. From the other side, Rigo glanced over, recognizing that slightly uncomfortable note in Daichi's voice. It was the same every time his friend was asked about his quirk, like he'd rather fade into the wallpaper than talk about it. "I can blend in," Daichi explained, his voice modest, almost apologetic. "Not real invisibility or anything cool like that. I just sort of, vanish into the background. Camouflage. People never seem too impressed." Akiha's eyebrows rose, her curiosity growing sharper. "Not impressed," she echoed, her tone carrying a hint of disbelief. Daichi gave a small, dismissive shrug. "That's what people always say. It's not like flashy. I can't blow stuff up or light up a room. No lasers. No big spectacle. It's just blending." Akiha leaned forward, her chin propped in her hand, studying him with a thoughtful intensity. For a moment, it felt as though she was seeing straight through all the doubts Daichi tried to hide. "So, you can basically disappear whenever you want?" she asked. Daichi nodded. "Pretty much, yeah. And you can move around without anybody noticing?" He shrugged again, a little sheepish. "Yeah. And you could listen in, gather intel, maybe even find people who are in trouble without anyone realizing you're there?" He hesitated, as if he'd never considered the full extent of his own ability. "I guess so," he admitted. Akiha's gaze sharpened, and for a moment she looked as focused as she did before a sparring match, all the playful energy replaced by a fierce seriousness. "That's not weak," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "That's exactly the kind of skill anyone would want, especially a hero." Daichi blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, really? If you ever decide to go pro," Akiha continued, warming to her point, "you'd be perfect for missions that other heroes can't handle. Stealth ops, reconnaissance, rescues in dangerous places, sneaking into villain hideouts to get people out or gather information. Most heroes can't get anywhere near that without being seen." Rigo nodded, backing her up. "She's right. Most people only think of the loud, flashy stuff. But half the time, The real work is what happens behind the scenes. Your quirk could make all the difference. Daichi looked between the two of them, as if trying to decide whether they were teasing him. You guys actually think that? Absolutely, Akiha said, her conviction unmistakable. Being a hero isn't just about fighting or making headlines. It's about saving people and sometimes saving them before the danger even starts. You could prevent disasters before anyone else even knows there's a problem. Daichi felt a strange lightness in his chest. For so long, he'd carried around this quiet weight, a sense of inadequacy that nobody ever put into words but that he always felt anyway. Hearing Akiha and Rigo see value in what he could do, rather than what he couldn't, chipped away at that heaviness. No one's ever said that to me before, he admitted, his voice quieter than usual, raw with surprise. Akiha grinned, a smile that was both fierce and reassuring. Then I guess they weren't really paying attention. Or maybe they just didn't understand what being a hero actually means. Daichi didn't joke, didn't try to play it off like he usually would. Instead, he let the gratitude show in his eyes and voice, unguarded for once. Thanks, he said simply the word, carrying more weight than he expected. Rigo just smiled, content to watch as his friends found a new understanding, proof that sometimes the most powerful quirks aren't the ones that make the biggest noise, but the ones that make the biggest difference. What about you? She asked, turning to look at him, her eyes curious but not judging. He stiffened, feeling the familiar tension crawl up his spine. Quirkless, he admitted, the word landing heavy and solid in the space between them, as if it might crack the table. Akiha didn't even blink, her expression soft and untroubled. Oh, she said simply. That's fine. Rigo blinked, caught off guard. Really? Yeah. She smiled, and it felt like sunlight breaking through overcast skies. So, what's your dream? He hesitated, glancing down at his hands. No one ever asked him that, not really. But her voice was gentle, coaxing. He took a breath and let the words tumble out. I want to help people. With science. Build things that actually make life safer. Maybe invent something that changes how people live, even if it's just a little. Akiha nodded, listening so closely it made him feel brave. That's a good dream, she said, and he believed her. Akiha tilted her head, her gaze lingering on Rigo for a few extra seconds. It wasn't the kind of look that made you feel small or picked apart. Instead, she seemed lost in thought, as if she was tracing the outlines of something invisible but deeply important. Her eyes held a quiet intensity, like she was searching for a truth she hoped to find reflected in him. You know, she said at last, her voice softer than before, almost confidential, that's actually why I don't care that you're quirkless. Rigo's surprise was plain. He blinked, lifting his eyes to meet hers. Why? He asked, uncertain what she meant but somehow wanting to hear her say it. Her fingers tapped a gentle rhythm on the table, each beat thoughtful. Most people I meet with quirks, with power, they talk about themselves. They brag about what they can do, what they've accomplished, or who they've defeated. It's always about being on top, fighting, winning, showing off. They make it sound like having a quirk is a ticket to being important, like it gives them the right to decide what matters. She paused, letting her words sink in before she continued. When she looked at him again, the intensity in her eyes had only deepened. There was no room for doubt or pretense. But you? Every time you talk about the future, it's about what you want to make, not what you want to break. You always mention what you want to protect, what you hope won't happen. It's never about being the strongest. It's about keeping people safe, about making things better, even if no one notices. That matters to me more than any flashy power ever could. A lump formed in Rigo's throat, sudden and unexpected. He'd never realized how much he wanted someone to see him this way, to see past what he couldn't do and notice what he tried to do. Words tangled up behind his lips. My dad always says strength is about force, Akiha went on, a wry note in her voice. He thinks if you're strong, you make people listen just because you can. Power means you get to decide the rules. He's always pushing me to stand above everyone else, to show off what I can do. But I've never liked that. I don't want to be someone people are afraid of. Her lips twitched, a hint of a smile that never quite reached smugness. I think real strength is choosing to help, even when you don't have to. When you're not getting anything out of it except knowing you did the right thing. When you step up, not because it's expected, but because it's the kind of person you want to be. That's rarer than any quirk. That's what I respect. Across the room, Daichi glanced over, catching the moment without interrupting. His eyes softened, and though he didn't speak, his expression said he understood the weight of Akiha's words. Akiha's attention returned to Rigo, her features gentler now, the earlier sharpness replaced by a warmth that made the air around them feel different. "You don't need a quirk to be brave," she said quietly. "You've already proved that to me, just by being yourself." Something unfamiliar and bright unfurled in Rigo's chest of fragile hope, a sense that maybe there was more to him than he'd ever allowed himself to believe. No one had ever looked at him like this, much less told him he was more than the sum of what he lacked. "Thanks," he managed at last, the word barely making it out. It felt like too little, but it was all he could say. Akiha shrugged, but there was a faint flush on her cheeks. "Just being honest," she said, and for a moment, it felt like honesty was the rarest kind of courage of all. Akiha turned to Daichi, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "What about you?" she asked gently. "What's your dream?" Daichi hesitated, caught off guard by the question's weight. It wasn't that he didn't have an answer, it was just that no one had ever asked in a way that made it feel real, like it was something important. He paused, almost awkward, a quiet laugh escaping as he rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. Honestly, I never really thought about it." Rigo didn't bite. He shot Daichi a look, half skepticism, half encouragement. "Come a minute. You've thought about it. You have to have." Daichi's shoulders slumped as he sighed, surrendering to the truth. "Yeah. Maybe I have." He stared intently at the table, searching for the words buried inside him. "I guess. I want to help people too. But not the way everyone expects. I don't want to be the guy out front, making a scene or soaking up the spotlight. That's never been me." He paused, as if sorting through the pieces of himself he'd always kept hidden. "I want to help in the quiet ways. The ways people don't always see but end up needing the most. I want to be the one who notices the small things, the cracks other people miss." Akiha leaned in, sensing something important in the way Daichi spoke, her attention anchored to every word. "With my quirk, I can get to places other folks can't reach. I can slip through the gaps, see around corners, spot trouble before it explodes. I've always found myself in the right spot to stop something bad from happening, even if nobody realizes it. I find the people who are lost, the ones who aren't shouting for help but need it all the same. I want to be the guy who makes sure nobody gets left behind, who catches things before they spiral. I want to be the safety net, the watchful eye, the person who makes things better before anyone even knows they could have gone wrong." As he spoke, his voice grew steadier, conviction building with each word. It was like he was finally letting himself say the thing he'd always felt deep down. Rigo's expression softened, a flicker of understanding glinting in his eyes. Daichi gave a crooked, self-conscious smile, his gaze flicking to Rigo. "And if I'm being honest, I want to stick with you, Rigo. Whatever happens, science projects, hero work, all of it. Someone's got to keep an eye on you, make sure you don't blow up the lab or get into something over your head." Rigo blinked in surprise, a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude crossing his face. "You don't have to." "I know," Daichi cut in quickly, his words firm. I want to be there. For you, for both of you. For the people who need someone to notice when they're in trouble, even if they don't ask." Akiha's smile was radiant, warm and proud. "That sounds like a hero to me. Not all heroes wear capes or break down doors. Some save the day by seeing what others miss." Daichi chuckled, relief and something lighter flickering inside him. "Yeah, even if I'm not throwing punches or making speeches." She grinned, her eyes bright with certainty. "Especially if you're not. Teams need more than just muscle, they need someone who sees the whole picture, who keeps everyone grounded. You're the glue, the one who holds it all together when it matters most." For the first time in a long while, Daichi felt a sense of purpose settle around him, snug and right. Maybe this role he always found himself in the quiet observer, The steady presence wasn't just an accident or a fallback. Maybe it was needed. Maybe it was heroic in its own way. I guess that's my dream then, he said softly, his voice carrying a new confidence. To be useful. To be there when it really matters, even if no one sees it but me. Rigo looked at him, emotions tangling in his chest: gratitude, relief, something deeper he couldn't quite put into words. You already are, Daichi. More than you know. Daichi's smile widened, brighter than before, the heaviness in his chest replaced by something hopeful. Yeah, well, I'm not planning on stopping anytime soon. Someone's gotta keep you two out of trouble. Akiha laughed, the sound light and sincere, and for a moment, the three of them sat together in comfortable silence, the future feeling just a little more certain. Daichi, curiously, decides to ask what her dream was. What about you? He asked Akiha. She answered without hesitation, her voice steady and clear. I want to be a hero. The kind who helps people even when it's scary, even when you have to stand up to people more powerful than you. Both boys nodded, understanding flickering in their eyes. Akiha's lips quirked upward, but there was a shadow behind her smile. Even though my dad doesn't like that idea. What do you mean? Rigo asked, his curiosity breaking through his earlier hesitation. He leaned in, searching Akiha's face for any clue to the real story. Akiha exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something heavy. He says heroes can't be trusted, she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, but every word weighed down by certainty. Rigo's eyebrows shot up in disbelief, the word striking him as both absurd and oddly chilling. Can't be trusted? But why? Akiha's lips twisted in a small, uneasy frown. He thinks they run on feelings. That they just leap in, act without thinking about the consequences. That when things go wrong, and they always do, eventually no one can really hold a hero accountable. You can't drag someone like that into a courtroom, can't order them to stand down. They're above all that. Daichi, who had been silent until now, frowned, concern creasing his brow. But isn't that the whole point? He asked, his voice edged with confusion. Aren't heroes supposed to take risks nobody else would? Akiha gave a weary, almost resigned smile, her eyes flickering to Daichi and then back down to her hands, which she clasped tightly in her lap. That's exactly what I said to him. Heroes do what needs to be done, even when it's dangerous. Even when nobody else dares. She fell quiet for a moment, staring at the pale lines on her palms as if the answer might be written there. But he doesn't see it like that. To him, unpredictability is just another word for danger. He wants me where he can always find me, somewhere he can keep everything under control. No surprises, no risks. He thinks that's safer for everyone. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier with every word. Rigo felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine, the kind that came not from fear of what someone might do, but from suddenly understanding just how carefully the world could be arranged to keep people in their place. He couldn't have said exactly what frightened him, only that something about the idea of safety at the cost of freedom left him unsettled, as if a door had quietly locked somewhere behind them. Daichi frowned, curiosity piqued. Who's your dad? General Kurosawa. She replied, almost offhand, as if it was just another fact. Suddenly, both boys stilled, the weight of her words settling in. Dado, Daichi managed, awe and apprehension mingling in his voice. Akiha shrugged, a small, defiant gesture. Titles don't mean much to me. What you choose for yourself, that's what matters. Rigo glanced at her, something shifting in his chest. Well, do we believe in your dream? He murmured, and for once, it felt like he was allowed to say it out loud. Akiha's smile widened, a real, radiant thing that seemed to banish the shadows. In that moment, something changed between them, a quiet understanding, a spark of possibility. 3 kids, different stories, same table. No quirks needed to feel like they belonged. The bell rang, slicing through the stillness. But this time, Rigo felt something new, an ember of hope, warm and bright where loneliness used to be. Not just a friend, he realized, but the beginnings of a team. Maybe even a family. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full of promise. End of chapter. The afternoon lingered, thick with the everyday chorus that hovered around the school's edges, clipped conversations, the scrape and shuffle of shoes across sun-warmed pavement, that subtle, stretching hush that signals the last chapters of daylight. Doors thudded closed as clubs wound down, the metallic clicks echoing through emptying classrooms. Fragments of laughter ricocheted down the halls, rolling and breaking like gentle waves against the shore. Rigo moved with his hands buried deep inside his sleeves, shoulders drawn in as if bracing against an invisible draft. His gaze drifted, restless, tracing an invisible path from the ground, up the battered lockers, to ceiling tiles stained with the memory of old leaks. He was always watching, always tracking the world's pulse, turning over questions in his mind like pebbles in a pocket. Beside him, Daichi drifted along at an easy pace, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, his walk measured but unhurried. There was a steadiness to him now, something hard-earned. Not quite bold, but no longer brittle, as if the things that once made him flinch had finally begun to dull at the edges. On Rigo's other side, Akiha matched their steps, her presence a subtle blaze. Her laughter seemed to warm the hallway, filling up the empty spaces with a kind of quiet courage. Akiha glanced at Rigo, her eyes bright and searching. "You're thinking again," she said, her voice lilted with amusement and concern. Rigo blinked, caught mid-thought. "I always think," he replied, as if it were the natural order of things. Daichi grinned, a flicker of genuine humor sliding past his more reserved exterior. "Yeah, but this is the heavy-duty variety. You've got that look, like you're plotting something that'll end up in the science lab getting shut down." Rigo nudged his glasses up, a small defense. "I was considering a hypothetical." Akiha's eyes sparkled. "Oh no. Science." He nodded. "Yeah." Daichi groaned, melodramatic. "Just say it's not explosions." Rigo's mouth twitched. "Not explosions. Just controlled reactions." Daichi shot him a deadpan look. "Somehow, that's actually worse." Akiha's laughter rang out, sudden and sincere, the sound spilling down the hallway and loosening something knotted in Rigo's chest. There was a tenderness to these moments, so precarious, like holding a piece of glass to the sunlight, knowing how easily the wrong movement could send it crashing. They veered into a lesser-used corridor, the kind that time forgot, walls lined with faded posters, doors marked for storage. Here, the school's heartbeat slowed, their own footsteps grew louder, sharper, underscored by the hush. But even in the quiet, tension crept in, a subtle shift felt more than seen. Rigo sensed it immediately, a tightening in the air, the familiar warning of something gathering force behind his eyes. 3 figures stood ahead, leaning against the lockers, their voices fading as they registered the trio's approach. The boys' stares lingered, too long, moving from Akiha to Daichi, then finally settling on Rigo with an intensity that felt more like a threat than curiosity. Daichi's stride faltered, almost imperceptible, but Rigo caught it. He always noticed the cracks. "Well, look at this," one of the boys sneered, peeling himself from the locker as if the sight of them was something to be dismissed. "Didn't think you two had anyone left to hang around with." Another boy snickered, his laughter sharp and mean. "Guess miracles happen, huh?" Daichi's jaw set, the old tension threading through his posture. "We're just passing through," he said, voice controlled but clipped in effort not to give them more than they deserved. The first boy smirked, eyes flicking to Akiha as if expecting her to flinch. "Relax. We're just talking," he said, the words edged with a challenge. Then, turning back to Daichi, "So, what's it like? Having a quirk that makes you disappear? Something so weak?" The air shifted, colder now. Daichi's shoulders stiffened, the taunt cutting deeper than the boy knew. The second boy chimed in, piling on with practiced ease. "Bet that's useful. Hiding when things get tough. Blending in, running away." Rigo's hands clenched tighter inside his sleeves. He could feel his own pulse drumming in his palms. Then the third boy locked eyes with Rigo, his gaze sharp and ugly, voice low and deliberate. "Still quirkless?" The word landed like a blow, heavy and final. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt and stretch, the hallway elongating as if viewed through warped glass. The lockers blurred, the floor dissolved beneath him. The air thickened, pressing in around his ears, dulling sound to a distant, underwater murmur. He wasn't really there anymore, he was adrift in that old, cold space where time slowed and fear pressed in, the world unraveling at the edges. Suddenly, someone moved too quickly, too close. The threat was real, immediate. "Hey!" Daichi stepped forward, interposing himself between Rigo and the boys, his body a silent barrier. "That's enough," Daichi said, his voice steady, carrying an authority he hadn't always possessed. The boys hesitated, thrown by Daichi's calm. "What, you gonna disappear on us now?" one jeered, but there was a crack in his bravado. Before Daichi could respond, another voice cut cleanly through the tension. "Step away," Akiha said, her tone unyielding, her eyes laser-sharp. She stood her ground, a quiet furnace heat radiating, not wild but controlled, the kind that warmed rather than burned. "Now," she repeated, each syllable measured and certain, brooking no argument. The boys paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. This wasn't the reaction they'd come for, not from Akiha, not from anyone who usually kept the peace. One mumbled something under his breath, and then, with a show of careless swagger, they retreated, their laughter ringing hollow as they disappeared around the corner. Silence hit like a physical thing, the tension dissolving but leaving echoes behind. Rigo hadn't moved. He stood frozen, the aftermath of panic still rippling through him. "Rigo," Daichi said softly, returning to his side. "Hey, look at me." Rigo's vision swam, the world reduced to vague shapes and muffled sounds. He heard Daichi distantly, as if from the bottom of a well. "Count with me," Daichi said, voice gentle but anchoring. "Like before." "Okay." Rigo swallowed, his throat tight. Point 1. "Good," Daichi encouraged, steady as a metronome. Point 2. Akiha crouched in front of him, careful not to invade his space, her voice a quiet tether to reality. "You're here. You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you." Point 3. Rigo's breath caught, shuddered, then began to even out, each number grounding him a little more. Point 4. Gradually, the world settled back into focus, the floor solid under his feet, the air sweet with the promise of evening, the comforting presence of his friends close at him. They left the corridor behind, slipping out to a small patch of grass hidden behind the gym, where the day's last golden light filtered through the trees in long, forgiving rays. Rigo sat hunched forward on a battered bench, elbows braced on his knees, staring at the ground as if it might yield some secret truth if only he looked hard enough. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely holding together. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," Akiha cut in, her voice firm but gentle, brooking no argument. She sat beside him, close but respectful of his space, her warmth a silent reassurance. "You don't have anything to apologize for." He jerked his head up, caught off guard, as if the ground had shifted beneath him and he was only just now finding his feet again. "Hey, don't apologize," she said, her voice gentle but anchored, steady in a way that left no room for argument. She didn't soften the truth, but she didn't make it hard either. "You didn't do anything wrong." Rigo hesitated, like he was trying to sift through a storm of thoughts, searching for words that wouldn't get stuck in his throat. "It just happens," he said, the admission small but loaded, like he was afraid of what it might unravel. Daichi, standing close by, gave a slow, deliberate nod. "And when it does, we're here." The words hung in the air, a quiet promise. It was as if he was offering Rigo something to hold on to, whether Rigo took it or not. Akiha watched him carefully, her gaze steady and concerned. He looked brittle, like a glass about to crack, his hands still trembling a little. "Does this happen a lot?" Her question was soft, but you could hear the worry underneath, as if she couldn't help but wonder how often he carried this weight alone. He hesitated again, the silence stretching, then nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes." The admission seemed to cost him something, but he gave it anyway. She didn't push for more. Instead, her voice dropped, turning more tender, almost a whisper. "Why?" The question was careful, an invitation rather than a demand. Rigo stared at his hands, the truth heavy and stubborn inside him, refusing to be spoken. But somehow, in the hush of the moment, he found the words. My parents are gone, he said, voice raw. It wasn't peaceful. The pain flickered in his eyes, old and unresolved. Akiha's expression shifted. Instantly gone was the cautious curiosity, replaced now by warmth and understanding. You don't have to say more. She meant it. She didn't ask for details or stories, she just let the silence make space for him. He let out a breath, shaky but relieved, as if speaking the truth had let out some of the ache. I live with my cousins now, he added quietly. It felt like an afterthought, but it said everything about where he was and who he'd become. She nodded, taking it in, not prying for answers or explanations. There was comfort in that, someone willing to sit with your pain, not dissect it. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted after a pause, and the honesty in her voice made it clear she wanted to, but didn't know how. She looked a little lost, like maybe she was afraid she was failing him. Rigo gave a weak laugh, a sound that was equal parts gratitude and resignation. You can't. His voice was gentle, not accusing, just accepting. It was the kind of truth you only learn by living it. Then I'll stay, she said, her words simple but resolute. That's something, right? There was a vulnerability there, a hope that simply being present might matter. He looked at her, really looked, letting himself see the open concern and the quiet strength she offered. For the first time, he let himself believe her. Yeah, he said, and this time his voice was steadier. It is. After that, the three of them walked home together, the city glowing in the sunset, orange and purple streaks washing the sky, painting everything softer. It was the kind of evening that made you want to slow down, to breathe, to notice the world again. They didn't need to fill the silence with words. It was a silence that felt shared, not empty. Eventually, Daichi broke it, his tone light but sincere. Next time, we stick together. It was both a joke and a promise, an acknowledgement that things were hard but didn't have to be faced alone. Akiha shot him a look, grinning, one eyebrow raised. What next time? Her teasing was easy, meant to lift the mood, but beneath it was genuine care. Rigo smiled, a real one this time, not just a reflex. It was small, but it lingered, reaching his eyes. Sounds like you're daring fate, he said, and for a moment, the heaviness in his chest eased. Akiha laughed, the sound bright and unburdened. It was contagious, and Rigo felt something loosen inside him, like he could breathe a little easier. Later that evening, Rigo sat at his cousin's desk, the clutter of half-finished homework and scattered diagrams in front of him. He couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the afternoon, the words, the looks, the feeling of not being alone in his pain. The memory of it left him both raw and comforted at once. Reiko appeared in the doorway, arms folded, her silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. Tough day? She asked, and her voice had that familiar mixture of concern and practicality. Yeah, he admitted, not bothering to hide it. She crossed the room, dropping a stack of notes onto the desk. Then channel it, she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. I need you thinking, not just spitting out answers. She had a way of pushing him forward, even when he wanted to retreat. Rigo looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You always do this. Redirect, she said, smirking. Yeah, I do. It works, doesn't it? But then her expression shifted, growing serious. You don't just vanish when things get rough. There was a quiet insistence in her words, a reminder that he wasn't allowed to disappear into himself, not while she was around. He looked away, the old instinct to hide rearing up. You don't know that. Reiko didn't flinch. I wouldn't be here if you did, she replied, simple and direct. She didn't need to explain further. The truth was in her presence, in the way she refused to leave him alone with his darkness. She left him with the notes and the soft hum of the room, a silent promise that he was seen even when he tried not to be. Rigo picked up his pen, feeling the weight of the day but also a strange, tentative hope. He might not have all the answers, but he wasn't as alone as he sometimes feared. Outside, the world spun on wild, loud, unpredictable as ever. But in that quiet space, surrounded by the evidence of his messy, unfinished life, Rigo realized he had people who cared, people who would stay even when things broke apart. Right now, that was enough. In the silence, he found not emptiness, but company. And for the first time in a long while, he let himself believe that maybe just maybe he could keep going. End of chapter. Saturday crept in quietly, as if it tiptoed across the city, careful not to rouse anyone from their dreams. The sunlight eased its way through the morning clouds, gentle and unhurried, laying soft gold on the pavement and draping the Tadashima's living room in a warm, forgiving glow. For once, the world outside seemed to exhale, every sound softened. No sirens fractured the air, no distant shouts bounced off the buildings. Even the birds seemed to sing a little more slowly, their songs threading through the silence instead of shattering it. The Tadashima house was never loud, never bursting with the kind of chaotic energy that made your ears ring, but it was never silent either. There was always some gentle reminder of life humming in the background, a washing machine tumbling clothes through its cycle, the low, steady drone of the refrigerator, or the soft pad of someone's footsteps across the wooden floors. Even the subtle clatter of dishes being put away or the distant creak of a door opening was enough to reassure you that this was a place inhabited by real people. These small, persistent sounds became the heartbeat of the home, proof that the Tadashimas were present, that they cared for their space and for each other. Reiko's parents weren't the type to draw attention to themselves. They didn't raise their voices or make a show of their affection, but their presence was unmistakable. Her mother often worked late into the evening, sometimes not returning until well after dark, and her father's schedule was unpredictable. He might leave before sunrise and come back in the middle of the afternoon, or the other way around. Despite their irregular routines, there was a sense of constancy about them. The warmth they brought to the house lingered long after they passed through a room, infusing the place with a feeling of security that never quite faded. The daily rhythms of the Tadashima home revolved around Reiko and her younger brother, Rigo. Together, they managed the little things, preparing dinner, tidying up after meals, making sure the laundry was folded and put away. It wasn't a chore chart or a list of assigned duties that kept them motivated, but an unspoken understanding that each person contributed to the well-being of the whole. Reiko, especially, seemed to carry a quiet authority. She knew where everything belonged, the quickest way to get things done, and how to keep the peace between her parents' overlapping schedules and Rigo's restless energy. She didn't do it out of obligation or because anyone told her she had to. She did it because she loved her family and wanted their home to feel harmonious. In a world that could often feel unpredictable, the Tadashima house offered a rare kind of steadiness, built not on noise or spectacle, but on the gentle persistence of people who cared deeply for one another. Rigo lingered at the Tadashima's front window. His hands disappeared into the sleeves of his sweater, a habit from childhood he had never outgrown. He watched the empty street, half expecting some sudden commotion to snap the spell. But there was only the hush of regular life, so rare it almost felt foreign. For a long moment, he let himself stand still, as if moving too much would break the fragile peace. Behind him, Reiko's voice sliced through his thoughts, playful and familiar. "Quit pacing," she called, her tone teasing but edged with the warmth only siblings shared. "You're gonna wear a path in the floor." "I'm not pacing," Rigo muttered, though the words felt weak even to him. He shifted his weight, feet unconsciously moving as if to prove her wrong. Reiko's eyes sparkled with mischief. 6 steps back and forth. "I counted. That's classic pacing, bro." A sigh escaped Rigo, slow and shaky. He turned from the window, glancing at the broad planks of the floor as if searching for the grooves he must have made. I don't want this to get weird," he admitted, the words heavier than he'd meant them to be. Reiko grinned, softer now, but with a hint of triumph at having coaxed him into honesty. "You're inviting friends over. That's the opposite of weird. That's normal. That's good." He wanted to believe her, but the knot in his stomach refused to loosen. Maybe nothing was just normal for him, not yet. Before he could explain or argue, a sharp knock rattled the quiet. The sound jolted Rigo, and he froze, heart thudding. Company had always made him nervous, especially now, when everything felt so tentative, like a new skin he hadn't grown into yet. Reiko was already moving, her confidence filling the room as she strode to the door. "Chill. I'll get it," she said, tossing him a reassuring glance over her shoulder. The door swung open, and Daichi's voice barreled inside, cheerful and booming, slicing through the morning calm. "Good morning, Tadashima household. We come bearing snacks and parental approval." It was impossible not to smile at the sheer volume of his enthusiasm, as if he was determined to make sure nothing stayed awkward for long. Trailing close behind, Daichi's mom stepped inside, her presence both commanding and kind. "Daichi," she said, her tone a balancing act between scolding and affection. "Thank you for having us." Rigo could see the way her eyes softened at the sight of Reiko and the room. She was grateful, too, for this gentle Saturday. And then there was Akiha, hovering just behind the others. Rigo almost didn't recognize her at first. Out of her uniform and away from the strict lines of school, she seemed transformed, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, her posture easy, her eyes wide and bright. There was a kind of curiosity in the way she took in the room, equal parts cautious and open, as if she was collecting details to store away for later. She didn't look like she was judging anything, not the mismatched cushions or the faded rug or the way Rigo's hands fidgeted. Instead, she looked like she was memorizing it all, letting herself belong. For a heartbeat, Rigo's breath caught. All the words he'd rehearsed vanished. He could only stare, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. Daichi nudged him, grinning. "You good?" "Barely," Rigo managed, voice rough with "Mers." The embarrassment flared when Akiha caught his eye and smiled, her expression gentle and surprisingly direct. "Hi," she said simply. There was no artifice, just an honest greeting that seemed to leave room for whatever came next. Rigo swallowed, forcing himself to answer. "Hi." His voice stumbled, but she didn't seem to mind. Reiko, watching from the doorway, narrowed her eyes at them, sizing up the moment, and then her face broke into a wide, knowing grin. She had always been sharp, always first to recognize the things no one wanted to say out loud. "All right," she declared, clapping her hands together with a finality that made everyone smile. "Shoes off, snacks on the table, make yourselves at home. You're in the safe zone now. No judgment, no stress." Daichi's dad, who had quietly entered behind the others, chuckled a deep, rolling sound that seemed to fill the whole room with warmth. "Now this," he said, looking around at the gathered friends and family, "this is my kind of place." The living room buzzed with chatter almost right away, a lively current that seemed to sweep everyone along. Daichi's parents and the Tadashimas fell easily into conversation, swapping stories about the quirks of local schools, the legendary cafeteria disasters, the inexplicable popularity of soggy curry rice, and the ongoing enigma of why children, no matter how much they eat at dinner, always manage to scrounge around for more snacks within the hour. Laughter erupted when Daichi's mother described the time she found him trying to microwave a jelly sandwich, and Tadashima-san countered with his own tale of an ill-fated baking experiment that ended with flour covering half the kitchen. Akiha perched carefully on the edge of the couch, her back straight and hands folded, radiating a mixture of politeness and careful reserve. At first, she answered questions with measured precision, her responses smooth and practiced, as if she had learned long ago to anticipate what adults wanted to hear. Yet there was a brightness in her eyes, a quiet curiosity that flickered to life as the conversation went on. "So you transferred here recently?" Reiko asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Yes, ma'am," Akiha replied, her voice steady. Reiko gave a little grimace, waving a hand as if to erase the honorific. "Oh, don't call me that. I'm not ancient, you know. Just Reiko is fine." Akiha's lips quirked into a grin, a flash of something warmer breaking through her formal exterior. "Sorry. Old habit. My mom would scold me if I forgot." Across the room, Rigo lingered on the edge of the conversation, pretending to listen but finding his attention irresistibly drawn back to Akiha. His heart thudded in his chest, skipping and fluttering in a way that left him off balance, as if he'd just run up a flight of stairs he hadn't seen coming. Every time Akiha spoke, Rigo felt a mix of admiration and nervousness, unsure whether to join in or stay safely silent. After a while, as the adults became engrossed in a passionate debate about the best local bakery, Daichi leaned over and nudged Rigo's shoulder. "Want to check out Rigo's room?" he suggested, his tone casual, maybe too casual. Rigo shot him a look, eyebrows raised. I never said, he started to protest, but the words trailed off. Akiha stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt and glancing between the two of them. It's okay. If it's all right with you, she said, her voice gentle but eager. There was a hint of relief in her expression, as if she too welcomed a break from the spotlight of adult attention. Rigo nodded, swallowing the jumble of words that wanted to spill out. Yeah. That's fine, he managed, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. Reiko, not missing a beat, rose to her feet as well, arms folded with mock sternness. I need to supervise. For context, she declared, her eyes twinkling with mischief as she followed them down the hall, making it clear she wasn't quite ready to let the kids out of her sight just yet. Rigo's room didn't clamor for attention. It wasn't the kind of space that tried to impress, but it invited curiosity all the same. Everything was arranged with a kind of functional order, though it was clear life happened here, a real, messy sort of life. Books proliferated like an untamed garden, stacked in uneven towers on the floor, squeezed into overstuffed shelves, their spines worn and titles faded from frequent handling. The walls bore evidence of restless thought, notes and scraps of paper pinned up haphazardly, their edges yellowed and curling, filled with equations, questions, and the occasional doodle spiraling off into the margins. At the heart of the chaos, his desk sprawled under the weight of inspiration mid-flight. Sheets covered in half-rendered sketches overlapped each other, detailed machines that looked almost plausible, chemical structures branching like trees, diagrams that faded into unfinished ideas. Pens and rulers poked out of mugs, and a magnifying glass perched atop an open notebook, as if waiting to be used again at any moment. Akiha stepped in, cautious, as if disturbing the air might set off a chain reaction. Her gaze swept over the room, soaking in every detail with a kind of reverence. She looked almost awed, her wide eyes reflecting the fragments of Rigo's restless mind scattered across the room. You did all this? She asked, her voice soft but edged with wonder. Rigo's hand drifted to his neck. He shrugged, cheeks tinged with embarrassment. Yeah, just stuff I'm into, I guess. He tried to sound casual, but the pride bled through. Daichi, ever unbothered, threw himself onto the bed and stretched out, arms flung wide. He grinned up at the ceiling. He acts like it's normal for people to have blueprints for radiation fields just lying around. Most of us barely manage our homework. Akiha moved closer to the desk, her fingers hovering just above the disarray, careful, almost reverent. She didn't disturb a single page, but her eyes darted over the sketches and notes, piecing together the story behind each one. So you want to be a scientist, she said, not as a question but a quiet realization. Rigo nodded, his voice suddenly hushed, as if admitting something fragile. Yeah. It's the one thing that makes sense. The words hung there for a moment, and he wondered if they sounded as small as he felt saying them. Akiha turned to look at him, her head tilted, curiosity shining in her eyes. Why? She asked, and there was no challenge in her tone, just simple, sincere interest. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the question settle in his chest. But before he could second-guess himself, the truth tumbled out. Science doesn't care where you come from, he said. All that matters is if you're right. Doesn't matter if you grew up in some tiny town or if you've got the right connections. If you can prove something, if you can discover something, then you belong. He surprised himself by how much he meant it. Akiha nodded slowly, as if she was filing his answer away somewhere important. He saw understanding flicker across her face, a quiet respect. From the doorway, Reiko watched the exchange with a half-smile, arms crossed. You should check out his notebooks, she said, amusement and pride mingling in her voice. Kid's brain never shuts up. Sometimes I think he's got more going on in there than the rest of us put together. Akiha's smile landed on Rigo then, gentle and genuine. I think that's a good thing, she said, and her words felt like a small gift. In that moment, Rigo felt something shift inside him, a warmth spreading through his chest, fragile but real. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't just tolerated or overlooked. He felt seen, and in the quiet acceptance of these friends, the messy, hopeful pieces of his world finally settled into place. Later, after everyone had eaten their fill of salty chips and sweet pastries, and the room buzzed with the lingering echoes of laughter, Akiha found herself drifting to Reiko's side. Across the room, the boys were embroiled in a familiar argument, one of those endless debates about what defines a real hero. Was it the quiet precision of stealth, slipping through shadows and leaving no trace, or the sheer force of smashing through obstacles, unafraid and unstoppable? Their voices rose and fell, good-natured but stubborn, each convinced of his own viewpoint. Reiko didn't join in. She watched Rigo as he argued, her eyes following the animated way he gestured, the way his face lit up when he made a point. He looked genuinely excited, his usual reserve replaced by something brighter, more open. Still, beneath the enthusiasm, there was a carefulness to his movements, a sort of wariness that lingered even when he laughed. Reiko leaned closer to Akiha, her voice low and thoughtful. "He doesn't usually talk like that," she murmured, almost as if she was speaking to herself. Akiha turned to her, caught off guard. "Like what?" "Relaxed," Reiko said, her gaze steady, as if she was trying to see whether Akiha understood the weight behind the word. Akiha glanced back at Rigo, who was grinning now, caught up in the rhythm of the group. She smiled, feeling a warmth at the sight. "That's good," she said quietly, meaning it. A comfortable hush settled between them, the kind that comes when something real has just been shared. "He lives here," Akiha said after a moment, her tone gentle, more a statement of realization than a question. Reiko nodded, her expression unreadable for a heartbeat. "Yeah." Akiha hesitated. "Why?" Reiko looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. She seemed to be weighing her words, measuring how much to share, how much to keep hidden. For a while, it seemed she might not say anything at all. Then, softly, "His parents are gone." Akiha felt her breath catch, a sudden ache opening up inside her. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Most people don't," Reiko replied, her voice almost a whisper. "He doesn't really talk about it. He tries hard to act like everyone else, to keep things light. But there's a lot he carries." Akiha nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge. "I won't ask again." Reiko looked at her, and for a moment her eyes softened, filled with a gratitude that went unsaid. "Thanks," she said simply. There was so much more she could have added, details about how Rigo came to live here, stories of the long nights and the quiet worries, the memories that still haunted him. She could have given names, painted pictures of the past, shared the kind of truths that leave a mark and change the way you see someone forever. But she didn't. Maybe she knew that sometimes it was enough to let the silence speak, to let understanding settle in without demanding more. Instead, she said, "He's safe here." Her voice was steady, a promise and a reassurance all at once. Akiha held onto that word, letting it settle in her chest, a quiet anchor amid all the uncertainty. It was a word that meant more than just walls and a roof. It meant belonging, trust, the rare sense of being allowed to just be. For a long moment, she simply sat with Reiko, the noise of the boys' argument fading into the background, thinking about how rare and precious that sense of safety really was. End of chapter. 1 year later. The news came quietly, slipping into the morning like a secret barely worth mentioning. It arrived right after attendance, while most of the class was still half awake, minds shuffling between breakfast crumbs and the promise of recess. The teacher's voice, usually quick and clipped, slowed for just a moment as she tapped the chalk against the board. "Field trip next week," she announced, as if it were just another spelling test. "We're visiting Dr. Bruce Banner's Fukushima research facility. This isn't a volunteer trip. Everyone goes and you'll be writing a report after." A groan rolled through the classroom, swelling as one complaint overlapped another. Chairs squeaked, and someone dropped a pencil. It was always the same whenever a trip was announced: first the excitement, then the disappointment when it wasn't the aquarium or amusement park. "Why can't we go somewhere fun?" someone whined. "Who wants to see a bunch of test tubes?" chimed in another. "My cousin went last year," a girl piped up, wrinkling her nose. "She said it smells like bleach and metal and you have to wear these weird shoe covers." But Rigo heard none of it. The usual static of the classroom faded to a low hum. His pencil hovered, forgotten, over a half-finished doodle in the margin of his notebook. Dr. Bruce Banner. The name pulsed in his mind, bright and electric, like someone had flicked on a switch inside him. All at once, the fog of routine cleared. He sat up straighter, eyes wide, alert in a way that felt almost foreign. Akiha, always quick to notice the smallest shift in her friends, leaned in. "You okay?" she whispered, her voice gentle beneath the noise. Rigo nodded, maybe too fast, his fingers tightening around the edge of his desk. He could feel his heart beating a little quicker, excitement and nervousness tangled together. "Yeah," he said, though his voice was shaky. "Yeah. He had to pause, swallow, find the right words. "That place is incredible. Banner's work, he's changed everything. Did you know some of the biggest breakthroughs in energy and biology came out of that lab? Stuff we read about in science magazines, they started there." Daichi, perched backwards on his chair as always, grinned at him. "You look like we just got VIP passes to the future or something." Rigo couldn't help but laugh, the sound bubbling up and catching in his throat. "Maybe we did," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "It feels like it." Akiha's smile softened, her eyes crinkling with warmth. She loved this version of Rigo, the one who forgot to hide his excitement, who let his curiosity burn through the walls he usually built around himself. For a moment, he looked like the world hadn't tried to squeeze him into a shape he didn't fit. Like there was nowhere else he'd rather be than right here, on the edge of something extraordinary. The rest of the class moved on, already grumbling about the report, but Rigo's mind raced ahead picturing white lab coats, humming machines, the sharp scent of possibility in the air. The field trip wasn't just a day out of school for him. It was a door swinging open, an invitation to step into the places he'd only ever dreamed about. And for the first time in a long while, next week couldn't come soon enough. The bus rattled down the road, rocking with the restless energy of kids who seemed physically incapable of sitting still. Every seat was a scene of movement, elbows jostling into the aisle, hands darting across to swap chips and candy, voices rising and falling as they griped about the heat, the length of the ride, the early hour, the itchy uniforms. Some pressed their faces against the glass, trying to catch glimpses of the city as it slipped away behind them. Outside, the world was changing. The neat rows of houses and convenience stores faded, replaced by stretches of gray fencing that zipped past like a film reel. Beyond the barrier, the roads widened and emptied, the landscape shifting into a kind of blank anticipation. Scattered along the roadside were signs, big and impossible to miss, stamped with warnings in red and black block letters. Authorized personnel only. Radiation control zone. It didn't matter how often Rigo saw those signs, they always made his stomach flutter. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, eyes straining for the first glimpse of their destination. The others were still talking, but their voices faded to background noise as he searched the horizon. "There it is," he whispered, breath fogging the window. Daichi, sitting across the aisle, twisted around to look. "Man, you're practically shaking," he said, raising an eyebrow. There was a teasing note in his voice, but also curiosity. Rigo tried to steady himself, but the anticipation was too much. "I can't help it," he admitted, his voice low so only Daichi and Akiha could hear. "Do you even get how long Banner's been at this? This isn't just a science project, it's decades of work. If this thing actually works, we're talking about a revolution. A whole new way to power cities. Maybe even the world." Akiha leaned over, studying him with an amused glint in her eyes. "You sound like you already wrote the report and handed it in," she teased, but there was a warmth behind her words. Rigo felt his cheeks burn. He ducked his head, mumbling, "Sorry, But Akiha bumped his arm, gentle. "Don't apologize. I like it. You getting all worked up, makes it feel like something big is actually happening, you know?" He looked over at her, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. For a moment, their eyes met, her expression open, encouraging. The bus vibrated beneath them, a steady, thrumming reminder of where they were headed. Rigo held her gaze for a heartbeat, his nervous energy mixing with something else, hope, maybe, or just the thrill of being on the edge of something unknown before he turned back to the window, watching as the facility came into view. The fences, the warnings, the promise of something world-changing just beyond. The place seemed to erupt from the ground itself, A cathedral of glass and steel where the ordinary laws of architecture bowed to imagination. Sunlight ricocheted from the razor-sharp corners, splintering into fragments that danced across blinding white panels. Every surface shimmered, humming with a restless, coiled energy that seemed to seep up through the soles of your shoes and settle somewhere behind your ribs, a place alive with possibility and threat. They moved inside, herded along by a brisk tour guide whose steps echoed down corridors lined with thick, almost impenetrable glass. Beyond it, scientists glided by, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of monitors, their eyes locked on some distant horizon only they could see. The air was charged with focus and ambition, a silent current running beneath the clipped conversations and the soft tap of fingers on touchscreens. Screens mounted to the walls flashed with wild, impossible equation symbols and shapes spinning in frantic orbits, models alive with color and movement. It was as if the building itself breathed knowledge and invention. Rigo felt it all gather around him: information, inspiration, a dizziness that made the room seem to tilt. He barely blinked, afraid he'd miss something vital, some secret just barely out of reach. "This is our gamma stabilization wing," the guide announced, pausing with a note of pride. "Dr. Banner's been developing a way to harness gamma radiation to turn it into clean, reliable energy. It's far more efficient than solar, and there's no waste, no fallout. It could power entire cities with a fraction of the footprint." They came to a halt before an enormous chamber, its doors sealed tight. The room stretched upward, vast enough to conceal a small moon or a secret history. In its center, suspended as if by a trick of gravity, floated a sphere of green light. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, each throb like the heartbeat of some alien titan. The glow washed over their faces, soft and otherworldly, making everyone seem both more fragile and more magnificent. "The gamma sphere," the guide declared, his voice reverent. "It's fully autonomous, regulating its own output and containment. The safest gamma reactor on the planet maybe in history. No risk of meltdown, no contamination. It's a new era for energy." Rigo's breath caught in his throat, invisible hands tightening around his chest. He recognized the equations scrolling across the panel's notations and formulas he'd once scrawled in the margins of battered notebooks, ideas others had dismissed as reckless, even dangerous. Now those midnight dreams had been coaxed into reality, burning bright for all to see. "Mr. Banner solved the containment," Rigo whispered, awe and disbelief warring in his voice. "He actually did it. He made it work." Akiha nudged him, eyes sharp. "You still with me, or you drifted off into math land?" He nodded, barely able to tear his gaze away from the sphere. His eyes glittered with the reflections of the green light, his mind racing ahead to all the doors this would open. "I'm here," he said, voice hushed but certain. "This isn't just a breakthrough, it's a revolution. Everything changes from here." Lunch break arrived like a wave, and instantly the entire school erupted into a thunderous clamor. Laughter and shouts bounced off the walls as students poured out of classrooms, flooding the halls and scattering toward their usual hangouts. The cafeteria line ballooned with hungry kids, the sports courts overflowed with players, and clusters formed in every corner, each group carving out their own little piece of territory. "I need the restroom," Rigo said quietly, already pushing back his chair before his friends could answer. Daichi glanced up from his bento, concern flickering in his eyes. "We'll come with you." Rigo forced a small, reassuring smile and shook his head. "Nah, it's fine. I'll be right back. Promise." But Akiha wasn't convinced. She leaned forward, her gaze searching his face, lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't take forever, okay? Lunch will be over before you know it." "I won't." He meant it to. He'd gotten good at keeping his word, even when it was hard. He slipped away from the table, weaving between the crowded lunch tables and the chaos of the hallway. Each step away from his friends felt a little heavier, but Rigo kept his head down, hands jammed in his pockets, trying to look like he belonged. The further he walked, the more the din faded, replaced with a strange silence. The hallway leading to the bathroom felt deserted, almost unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. He reached the restroom and pushed the door open. Immediately he froze. 3 guys stood inside, forming a wall that blocked the entrance. Their uniforms were rumpled, and their eyes glinted with malice. Rigo recognized them. He'd seen them around, always together, always looking for trouble. "Well, look at this," sneered the one in front, arms folded across his chest. "Lost your mommy, Rigo?" Rigo exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Move." The second guy let out a harsh laugh, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or what? You gonna bore us to death with your nerd talk? Maybe give us a lecture about atoms or something." Rigo tried to sidestep them, but a rough hand shoved him back, hard enough to sting. "You actually think you belong here?" the first one pressed, his words cold and deliberate. "Hanging around with people who have real quirks, like you're one of us?" Rigo clenched his jaw so tightly it hurt. He'd heard this before, whispered in the halls, muttered behind his back, spat in his face. Still, he forced himself to meet their eyes. "I don't have time for this." The third guy, the tallest of the bunch, stepped forward. "We're sick of pretending you fit in. You're not like us. You don't belong." Then the first guy leaned in until Rigo could smell the stale gum on his breath, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Especially with weak but Morita and that beach Kurosawa. Bet they drop you the second you stop being useful. After all, nobody sticks around for a quirkless Studafanjet loser." Something deep inside Rigo snapped, something that had been stretched and twisted so many times it finally broke. All the frustration, the humiliation, the ache of being different boiled up and spilled over. Before he could think, before doubt could grab him, Rigo spun on his heel. His fist flew out, connecting solidly with the bully's nose. There was a sickening crunch, and blood exploded onto the white tile. The bully stumbled back with a howl, hands clamped over his face, eyes wide in shock and pain. For a split second, the other two just stared, caught off guard by the sudden violence. Their mouths hung open, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. "You little," the second one snarled, voice trembling with rage. "You think you can get away with that?" They rushed him, fists flying. Rigo met them head-on, adrenaline screaming in his veins. He threw wild punches, each one fueled by years of pent-up anger. His knuckles cracked against jaws and ribs. He took his share of hits, 2 sharp blows to his side, a fist slamming into his stomach, pain bursting like fireworks behind his eyes. But he didn't back down. Not this time. For a moment, it felt like everything else vanished. The world shrank to fists and blood and the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He fought with all he had, refusing to let them win. Then, out of nowhere, something hard crashed into the back of his head. The pain was instant and blinding. His knees buckled, vision blurring to black as he crashed to the cold, blood-splattered tiles. Just before the darkness swallowed him, he thought he heard the distant echo of his friends calling his name. Rigo woke to a heaviness in the air, a pressure that pressed down on his chest before he even opened his eyes. It was electric, as if invisible currents were crawling across his skin, setting every nerve on edge. He sat up slowly, every muscle aching, and squinted at the glass walls enclosing him. The familiar containment chamber was transformed by flickering red warning lights, strobing in frantic rhythm. Above him, the Gamasphere, once a silent, ominous presence, now floated like a star gone mad, its green glow throbbing with unnatural intensity. A chill slithered down his spine. "No," he whispered, heart hammering. He pushed himself to his feet and stumbled to the sealed door, pressing his palms against the cold glass. He pounded, desperate. "Hey, let me out. Somebody." The only reply was the low, mechanical hum of the chamber and the relentless, rising pitch of alarms. Rigo's breath snagged, panic blooming in his chest. But beneath the terror, something else stirred, a reluctant awe. He drifted toward the console, drawn by the lines of code and equations scrolling across the screen. They were familiar, achingly so, the culmination of years of research, the work he'd poured himself into. Now, twisted by urgency, they spelled out disaster. "Mr. Banner," he muttered, voice trembling. "You actually did it. You pushed it too far." A new warning light blinked on. Then another and another, until the console was awash in urgent red. Suddenly, the intercom crackled, static lacing every word. Attention! Gammasphere systems experiencing instability. All personnel evacuate immediately. Rigo felt the blood drain from his face. The meaning was clear, cold, and absolute. He was trapped with a ticking bomb. Chaos erupted outside. Through the blurred glass, he glimpsed shadows racing past students and staff, faces twisted in fear, shouts mingling with the shrill wail of sirens. Shoes pounded on tile, doors slammed open, and the whole facility seemed to pulse with the frantic energy of flight. "Where's Rigo?" Akiha's voice rose above the din, raw with panic. She struggled against the grip of a staffer, her eyes wild. "He's with his group," someone tried to assure her, but the words rang hollow. "He's not," Daichi snapped, already breaking away. His face was set, jaw clenched with determination. "I'm going to find him." "Daichi, wait." Akiha called, but he was already gone, pushing into the tide of fleeing bodies. For a moment, Akiha and Daichi's eyes met hers, pleading, his resolute. "I'll bring him back," he promised, voice fierce. "I swear." She let go, fear clawing at her gut, sharp and cold as ice. Daichi fought his way against the panicked crowd, lungs burning with exertion and dread. "Rigo!" he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. He dodged between running students, ducked under flailing arms, until at last he reached the containment chamber. He arrived just as a chilling countdown echoed through the corridor, mechanical and implacable. Inside, Rigo jerked his head up, startled. "Daichi! What are you doing? You should be gone." Daichi pressed his palms to the glass, frantic. "What did they do to you? Why are you locked in?" 9. Rigo's eyes flickered with fear and something else, resignation. "They locked me in. Banner's experiment, it's unstable. You have to get out before. I'm not leaving you." Daichi's voice broke, the words fierce with loyalty and terror. 8. Rigo's gaze darted to the console, mind racing. He saw the numbers, understood the danger better than anyone. In a flash of insight, he realized there was one place, a maintenance alcove, shielded by thick alloy that might withstand the blast. "Daichi!" His voice steadied, resolve crystallizing. "Listen to me." 7. He yanked Daichi toward the alcove, surprising him with a sudden burst of strength. "Wait, what are you?" "Saving you," Rigo said, pushing him into the cramped space. 6. He slammed the manual seal shut, locking Daichi inside. Through the tiny window, Daichi's fists hammered against the glass, his face contorted with anguish. "Rigo! Don't do this! We can both make it." Rigo tried to smile, but it came out as a crooked, sad twitch. "At least you'll be safe. That's enough." For Daichi screamed, his voice ragged and raw. "This isn't fair. Rigo, please." 3. Inside the chamber, as the world narrowed to the countdown, Rigo felt a strange calm settle over him. His entire life, every choice, every equation had led here. Maybe this was what it meant to matter. Light swelled, blossoming into a blinding corona that devoured shadows and fears alike. The gammasphere detonated with a soundless fury. Green light flooded the world, erasing everything in its path. Rigo's scream ripped through the silence, echoing beyond the ruins. When the dust finally settled, emergency crews arrived to a scene of devastation. The containment chamber was gone, obliterated, melted into slag and ash. Smoke coiled into the sky, bitter and thick, marking the place where a miracle had gone wrong. Miles away, Dr. Banner stared at his monitor, the green glow reflected in his wide, haunted eyes. His hands shook, knuckles white, as he realized what he'd unleashed. In the parking lot, Akiha watched the smoke, tears streaming down her face, fists clenched in helpless rage. Daichi sat on the pavement, knees drawn to his chest, his body racked by silent sobs. The memory of Rigo's scream echoed in his mind, a wound that would never fully heal. That day, something changed, something deeper than scars, more lasting than loss. In the heart of the wreckage, a force was born. Not a hero yet, not a savior. Just a survivor, forged by pain and sacrifice. But soon, the world would know his name. And nothing would ever be the same again. End of chapter text. The place should have been blazing with radiation, a deadly storm of invisible energy. That's what the emergency crews braced for before even stepping off their trucks. The training so ingrained it moved their hands before their minds could catch up. Red hazard lights slashed through the darkness, spinning across the wreckage in frantic patterns, revealing shattered glass glittering on the floors, beams twisted into grotesque shapes, walls half-collapsed and bleeding cables. The facility's heart was torn open, exposed and pulsing with the memory of destruction. Sirens shrieked outside, echoing up and down the concrete halls, a soundtrack of chaos and dread. Containment teams advanced in thick protective suits, each movement measured and rehearsed, their boots crunching over debris. They swept their scanners in practiced arcs, eyes flicking from the blackened walls to their screens, every step tense, expecting the shrill warning of radiation alarms. They drilled for this, the silent killer, the invisible threat that lingered long after the blast, ready to seep into lungs and marrow. But the meters stayed stubbornly clean. No gamma spike. No hint of alpha or beta. The air, heavy with dust and the stink of scorched plastic, gave up nothing more. The instruments read as if this place were untouched, a hospital room instead of ground zero. A technician cursed under his breath, frustration warping his features. He thumped the scanner against his palm, cycled it off and on, pointed it at the walls again, desperate for a flicker, a warning, anything. "Run it again," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to himself or the scanner. He aimed, scanned, watched the numbers stubbornly hover at baseline. The device chirped steady, unbothered, almost mocking. "That can't be right," someone blurted, voice rising above the crackle of radios. The gammasphere blew. "We saw the numbers, the energy readings. Went off the charts." The lead scientist hovered behind them, clutching his tablet with white-knuckled hands. He scrolled through line after line of data, his eyes wide, disbelieving. "There's nothing," he said, his voice hollow. "It's like the radiation vanished. Like it was never here at all." Their confusion thickened the silence as they pressed on, working their way through the ruined corridors toward the main chamber. When they reached the blast doors, they stopped, some in awe, some in horror. The steel was peeled back, warped, edges curled and charred, as if some monstrous force had gripped it in a fist and twisted. Beyond, the gammasphere's cradle was empty, nothing left but a crater, the floor fused into milky glass, cables drooping like melted vines. No one spoke. For a moment, all that existed was the throb of sirens and the tang of burnt metal. The air felt wrong, thick with loss, with questions no one dared to voice. Then, a sudden sharp intake of breath broke the trance. A rescuer, flashlight trembling, froze mid-step. "Wait, something moved," he called, voice stretched tight as wire. They rushed in, hearts pounding, boots skidding over glass. In the center of the chamber, beneath the tangled wreckage, lay two bodies small against the devastation, fragile as dolls. One of them, Daichi Morita, was curled protectively around the other, arms locked so tight his fingers had gone bone white. He was shivering, his whole body racked with tremors, face smeared with ash and tears, lips cracked and murmuring words no one could quite catch. His eyes were ringed with red, wide and empty, staring not at the rescuers but at some terrible memory only he could see. The other, Rigo Shizurashi, lay still in Daichi's grasp. He looked untouched, impossibly so, his skin unmarked, hair unscorched, as if the violence that tore the room apart had passed him by. He didn't stir, didn't react to the chaos around him. "Get them out," a medic cried, voice sharp with urgency and disbelief. Now move." Hands reached for them, careful but swift. As they lifted Rigo onto the stretcher, Daichi's grip tightened, frantic, desperate not to let go. His voice cracked and rasped from his throat. Don't take him," he pleaded, clutching at Rigo's sleeve. He didn't move. He never woke up. He just, his words dissolved into sobs, his chest heaving. A medic knelt beside him, soft-voiced but firm, gently peeling his fingers away. "You're safe now," she murmured. "Both of you." We've got you. But Daichi shook his head, tears streaming down his smoke-streaked cheeks, his gaze locked on Rigo as the rescuers wheeled him away. He pushed me, he whispered, voice so small it was almost lost in the chaos. He shoved me away. He stayed. He made me live. No one replied. In the face of such sacrifice, of mysteries deeper than science could explain, there was nothing to say, only the silent promise to remember, to try to understand, and to carry them both out into the clean air and the uncertain dawn. The hospital lights felt way too bright. They buzzed overhead, cold, relentless, spilling over white walls and glossy floors that reeked faintly of disinfectant, a chemical tang that caught at the back of the throat. Every surface gleamed with the careful attention of unseen custodians, but no amount of shine could make the room feel less sterile, less alien. Rigo lay still at the center of it, hospital sheets tucked up to his chest, a limp island of stillness amid the quietly frantic energy of the machinery that surrounded him. The monitors blinked and beeped, the heart monitor tapping out a steady, maddeningly normal beat as if daring anyone to suggest otherwise. Daichi sat curled in an uncomfortable plastic chair, knees drawn to his chest, arms wrapped tight around them. His fingers were knotted together so fiercely that his knuckles had gone white. The ache in his hands was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. He barely seemed to breathe, his gaze flickering between Rigo and the slow pulse of numbers on the monitors, as if watching could somehow anchor his friend to this world. Akiha leaned against the doorframe, arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked like she was holding herself together by force. Her posture was rigid, chin lifted in a show of defiance, but her eyes betrayed her. They were fixed on Rigo, wide and unblinking, as if she feared that if she so much as looked away for an instant, he would slip from their grasp. Her jaw worked silently, the tension visible, but she said nothing. Words seemed useless here. It was Reiko who arrived last, drawn by the messages, the frantic calls, the sense that something irreversible had happened in the hours she'd been away. She didn't burst into the room or fling herself at his bedside. She simply stopped in the doorway, her breath catching a small, sharp sound, her eyes locked onto Rigo. In that moment he seemed impossibly diminished, dwarfed by the machinery, the sterile expanse of the room, the enormity of what was happening to him. He looked too small, too pale, as if the light itself was leaching the color and strength from his body. Her parents hovered just behind her, uncertain and silent, their faces drawn tight with worry and exhaustion. They exchanged glances with the other adults in the room, but no one spoke. Their presence was heavy in the air, a buffer against the unknown, but powerless to alter it. The doctor, a man who had seen his share of grief and confusion, cleared his throat. He stood at the foot of the bed, clutching a clipboard as if it might shield him from the questions he didn't want to answer. "We've done every test we have," he began, voice careful, as though measuring each word. "Bloodwork, imaging, neurology. We've gone over every possibility." Reiko stepped forward, her voice steady only because she willed it so. "So," she demanded, refusing to let her fear show. "What does it mean?" The doctor hesitated, the lines around his mouth deepening. "We don't get it," he admitted, the words landing with a weight that filled the room. "There's gamma radiation in his body. Not just traces he's saturated. It's as if his cells absorbed it, drew it in, held on to it somehow." Akiha let out a shaky breath, the sound brittle in the silence. "Is that bad?" she asked, though everyone already knew the answer. "In any normal case," the doctor replied, pausing as if the next words might change everything, "it's instantly fatal. Exposure on this scale, no one survives it." Daichi's head snapped up, disbelief and hope warring in his eyes. "But he's still alive," he said, voice half a question, half a plea. The doctor nodded, slowly. "He shouldn't be. By every measure we have, every precedent, he should be gone." And yet, he gestured helplessly at the monitors, at Rigo's stubbornly steady heartbeat. "He's still here." A hush fell, the kind that stretches seconds into eternities. The hospital noises faded into the background, distant footsteps, the faint hiss of air conditioning, the soft patter of rain against the windows. Inside the room, it felt as though time itself had paused, waiting for someone to break the spell. We can't treat something we don't understand, the doctor continued, his voice gentler now. Whatever's happening inside him, it's nothing we've seen before. His body isn't breaking down the way it should. It's like he's changing, adapting, but we don't know how or why. Reiko's hands trembled at her sides, anger and fear and helplessness swirling together. So now what? She asked, her voice raw with the effort of holding herself together. The doctor looked at each of them in turn, at the fear etched into their faces, at the hope that refused to die. We wait, he said finally, his tone softening still further. And we hope. That's all we can do for now. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming steadily against the glass. In the harsh light of the hospital room, surrounded by machines and unanswered questions, the four friends and their families sat together, bound by uncertainty and the quiet, desperate hope that tomorrow might bring something different. That night, the room slowly emptied, the hush thickening as each person left. Shadows stretched across the linoleum, the steady pulse of the monitors the only sign of life. Daichi, who'd spent the day pacing and muttering into his phone, finally surrendered to exhaustion. He slumped into a battered armchair, shoes off, head tilted back. Within minutes, his breathing deepened, the cadence of his snores almost peaceful. Akiha lingered longer, arms folded tight around herself, eyes pinned to the unmoving figure on the bed. She waited, jaw clenched, until security made their rounds. Only then did she step forward, pressing her palm briefly to the glass of the observation window. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to shed, her mouth twisted in a stubborn line equal parts fear and defiance. It was as if she was trying to leave a piece of herself behind, a silent promise. But Reiko would not be moved. She remained at Rigo's bedside, her grip on his hand white-knuckled, refusing to loosen even as her own body trembled with fatigue. She traced slow, deliberate circles on his skin, the old comforting motion from when he was a child and nightmares kept him awake. Now, the nightmare was real, and all she could do was anchor him with touch, as if her will alone could tether his spirit to this world. She leaned close, her voice a threadbare whisper, words laced with desperation and fierce hope. You're not leaving me, Rigo. Not this way. You hear me? After everything we've been through, you don't just get to walk out. I won't let you. The machines hummed and beeped, indifferent. Rigo lay motionless, his face pale, eyes shut. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, almost imperceptibly, his brow twitched a flutter beneath the skin, a tiny rebellion against oblivion. Reiko squeezed his hand tighter, hope flickering in her exhausted eyes. 2 nights crawled by, each hour stretching into the next. Hospital lights cycled from harsh to dim and back again. Visitors came and went, but Reiko remained, her watch unbroken, sustained by a stubborn faith that he would come back. Then, in the dead hours before dawn, the monitors erupted into frantic life. Sirens of sound filled the room. Rigo's body convulsed, eyes flying open as he gasped for air, sharp, desperate, as if surfacing from deep underwater. His heart hammered in his chest, sweat breaking out along his brow. The nightmare clung to him even as he woke, its echoes refusing to fade. He remembered fire roaring, all-consuming, the heat so intense it seemed to strip flesh from bone. He remembered a crushing weight pressing him down, breath squeezed out of him, panic sparking in every nerve. And light white-hot, merciless, stabbing through the darkness and burning everything away. For a moment, confusion reigned. He lay there, chest heaving, eyes wild, searching the sterile ceiling for answers. He didn't know where he was. Time was a foreign concept, a memory of a memory. The cold, antiseptic air felt wrong, unreal. Then the persistent beeping of the monitors dragged him partway back. He was alive. Hospital walls surrounded him, not flames. He raised trembling hands to his face, half expecting to see charred flesh, twisted scars. But his skin was untouched, almost eerily unmarked. His fingers flexed, ordinary and whole. What happened? He croaked, voice raw, as if unused for days. The words floated in the stillness, unanswered, vanishing into the sterile, fluorescent void. Outside, the city sprawled beneath indifferent stars, its people wrapped in dreams, oblivious to the miracle or aberration that had clawed its way back from the fire. Inside, something shifted within Rigo Shizurashi. He felt it, a presence, a weight, something bright and strange coiled deep in his chest. It was something new, something that hadn't been there before. He was changed, marked by the fire he had survived. Whatever had burned away in those flames, something else had been forged in their place, a spark, raw and untested, waiting to ignite. End of chapter.